Verify that it's playing on the stream, and then we'll get going.
Cool.
Give it a second to kick in. Come on. Still waiting. I'm watching the stream right now, waiting for it to click in. What is it, a 7-second delay?
I've heard anywhere between 15 and 30 seconds to get.
Okay, there we go. We are now live. Hey, everybody. All right, how's it going? This is Alpha Centurion. If you don't already know, we're going to have some different stuff going on today, so some different viewers. So a little introduction for myself. I am Alpha. This is my channel. We specialize in anti-apologetics from a Catholic point of view. That's right. You can be anti-apologetics. You can be anti-BS and still be a believer. Today, we have a special guest. I did purposely misspell his name, so the video is not suppressed. But this is, I believe this is Gay TradSpeaks. And I'm going to go ahead and put him on camera now. Hey, how's it going, kid?
Is that okay? Going well. How are you? Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so for my audience, can you give me a little bit of your background? Who are you, and why you're on this channel? And for my viewer that just asked, yes, BS Lewis, we're anti-BS here. I'm sorry, we never told you.
That's awesome. Yeah, my name is Kate. I'm 21, but I've spent a lot of time thinking through religion. So I grew up in a secular-ish household, or as people like to say, like a cafeteria Catholic household. We'd go to church on weekends, but it was never a dogmatic or actually believing more of a cultural thing. Into high school, I started really investigating the claims of the church, read my way in from just going to Novus Ordo Mass, became super involved in the youth group there, and then started becoming more and more trad as I dove deep into apologetics. Went to a public high school, actually converted a number of people there. So I was like always arguing to people about Catholicism, and apparently quite good at it. Became very trad, started going to fraternity parishes, big into the Latin Mass, as every Gen Z Catholic does. Moved across the country a few different times, ended up going to a college out in San Diego to pursue a degree in theology. I wanted to be a priest, particularly going to a Carmelite monastery up in Wyoming, never seen the outside world. And through a series of events, started really deconstructing and reading about the faith again over the past about 2 years or so, dealing with the fact that I knew that I was gay from a very young age, but basically lived a perfectly celibate lifestyle to be in line with church teaching. Never thought it was a big deal. As I got older, realized it was probably a little bit of a bigger deal. Looked for proof. I didn't think that I found enough to warrant that same level of conviction. Ended up deconstructing, and now I don't put a ton of labels on what it is that I believe, but I think if I were to take a quiz, most people would probably label me somewhere in the agnostic/atheist world, but very much with a deep appreciation for religion and some of the wisdom that we can glean there.
So if you don't know, I don't know how familiar you are with my channel, but I do active outreach to Muslims, to the LGBTQ community. I do active outreach to atheists. I usually guest on atheist channels. If you don't mind me asking, what made you want to come onto this channel to have a conversation about these kind of issues where we probably disagree more than agree?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing both on either side of religion that I found is that I thoroughly enjoy deep conversations. I love debate. I love really fleshing out what we believe and why we believe it and to what level we believe it, and how can we then package that up and engage with the best arguments from the other side. So I got an email about hopping on. Um, yeah, I was like, the worst that can happen is I know how to debate better, and the best thing that can happen is I either reconsider my positions or you reconsider, or just have a great time and make a friend in the process.
So I've been searching for a long time, for a very long time, even before this channel was dedicated to anti-apologetics or even religion in any kind of way, um, to look for a Catholic to talk about these subjects. I get a lot of anti-theists, a lot of ex-fundamentalists, a lot of ex-evangelicals. And while we end up agreeing a lot, it ends up hurting the debates because what they are arguing against is what I'm arguing against. So we just end up agreeing. So
Yeah.
it's going to be great to actually be able to play ball and play some tennis with someone who actually disagrees with my positions. So,
Yeah, and that's where I've always, in talking to a few other ex-Catholics and people that engage in debates, the question is always like, how, for lack of a better term, how confrontational do you get? Meaning, like,
mhm.
there's some YouTubers that like they have these long videos where they have the other side on and they play this game of like, oh yeah, I see where you're coming from, and then move on, and you're like, so I just listen to like an hour of people like stating what they believe in and moving on, which isn't inherently a bad thing, and then all the way to the other end of like the Matt Dillahunty, like let's scream at people on stream. And I think it's less of like a both and, or it's less of like an either or approach and more of like a both and, where I think different people find different things persuasive, and at different points in my journey, people along that like spectrum of confrontation have moved me or made me reconsider different things. And so this is kind of like my first public, it's not really a debate, but more of like a discussion. And so I don't know exactly how much we'll disagree, or the level of like let's go back and forth. But I'm open to whatever. I tend to not get emotional in debates. I did a lot of politics when I was younger, but also being boring the whole time and agreeing tends to not make the most entertaining content sometimes if people are
Just to
out
be
there looking
fair,
for blood.
my wife is an atheist and she's a professor at a very big place. So
Yeah,
yeah, so I'm used to disagreeing on these kind of things. So that's all.
yeah,
It's all good. And I don't lose. I don't lose against my wife. So that's saying something. And I only have an associate, so I'm not even smart.
that's
Um,
awesome.
okay, before we get into the video, we're gonna do a little watch along with Trent Horn, just so we can kind of both get to know each other and get to see
Yeah,
where we agree and disagree on the greater topics. I don't like this video. I'm gonna be very blunt. I did like the end. I think the stuff he said on the end was probably the best stuff he said in the last 12 years on this topic. He's one of the things that I have a problem with is not that his opinions, because he never really messes up on the dogma. Where I have a problem with is that he's so disgusted by people of a different way that he cannot hide his disgust. And so I feel that not only is he being dishonest and disingenuous when he's saying he wants what's best for someone in a certain position, but also I think he's the wrong face, because you can't say I love you. You know what I mean? It doesn't work.
yeah,
Or like homosexuals. Like no, like get off the screen. You're not the right guy for
yeah.
this. Put Father Mike Schmidt. Put Kim Embers. Put somebody on here who can actually smile and like mean it and be like, hey, we love you. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think Trent's great when it comes to like very for reducing the energy of a call and like getting
Mhm.
very dry about it. And I mean, he's written a book, "Made This Way," him and his co-author of like how to explain to your
What
kids
did
these
you think
hot.
of that book? If you don't mind me asking, I know we're not in the
Um,
interview yet, but
yeah. What did I think of the book? I haven't read it myself. I just downloaded it today to listen to. Making probably a longer video about Trent specifically. Um, I think that it's just like a weird thing to like write a book to explain things to kids when his kids are very young. And as far as I'm away, Layla Miller hasn't had to deal with like teenagers yet. Also, like I think Layla is kind of more of a problem. She wrote a book on divorce, despite not being a psychologist, not having parents that were divorced, and she just interviewed like a bunch of random friends about divorce, which is like not that you can't come to opinions, but like we really got to tone down. This is like a glorified mommy blog, is what her book is. But then on
Okay,
their book,
so
yeah,
there's the first place we can disagree. I just did a video yesterday or the day before disagreeing with someone who I actually like very much, Joshua Bowen's wife. I can't remember her name right now, but she
yeah,
hosts the show for Bart Ehrman, and she was saying that it was unethical for people who aren't experts to be speaking out on topics they don't quite grasp. And I'm like, hey, that's all that I do is speak opinions
yeah.
that I don't quite grasp.
Yeah, I think that anybody can have an opinion on anything. I think the way in which it came across is like, oh, she's an expert, especially to write a book. You either want like a ton of research, so it's not that like she can't write on it, but it's like as soon as you realize like, okay, this is a glorified like opinion piece, more or less. Like this isn't a serious researcher. I think we just got to put that into context. And with Trent and their book, like once again, it's not that he can't write a book about explaining things to kids. But it doesn't seem like he's had the chops of really engaging with young people, especially people in that lifestyle before. And he talks about a lot in his apologetics is about the Socratic method and reductio ad absurdum, which can be persuasive to perhaps like a straight Catholic who's thinking through these issues and wants to learn teleology. I think it can be quite persuasive, but especially on this issue, is like you have to like really know and be very cognizant of the language that you use. You have to be very cognizant of who you're talking to build that rapport, to actually like for them to give you permission to speak into their life. And so I think Trent puts together some good arguments, but I think they're only persuasive if you already agree and need to know how to explain things. But if I were back in my shoes when I was first listening to Father Mike Schmitz and Kim and Daniel Matson and all these people that could really talk about this issue, I think the powerful thing, especially with Father Mike, is that he can adequately label experiences and the emotions that people are especially emotions that people have never talked about before. And if you can label those, you have a ton of credibility because you go, oh, he knows what I'm feeling. Like he knows what he's talking about. And once you get through those emotions, people let their guard down and can ultimately like accept a conclusion, which is why I was celibate for so long, was somebody like Father Mike Schmitz and his content.
If I could slow
Yeah.
you down though a little bit, and again, we're going to do the video first, but do you feel that Father Mike Schmidt is sincere in his empathy, or do you think that's just his acting chops? I mean, he doesn't tell it anymore, but he used to tell the story about how he almost played Robin. So, I mean, he's clearly an actor, not just a
Yeah.
priest. Like those are the skills he's bringing in.
Yeah, I think it's a question that like we'll never know exactly how to go about like knowing what he's thinking. I think what we can know is that he's a very good actor. He's a very persuasive speaker, and he knows how to cloak any hard church teaching in what seems like empathy. I think it often comes off. There's talk, especially in the atheist world, of like the fundy baby voice, where it's like this faux empathy. And he's really good about like slowing down and inflecting on things and then speeding things back up. And so you have this juxtaposition between laughing and really intimate moments, which keeps people on their toes. And he has this long way of explaining things in a very roundabout way. So you actually forget like the steps in this argument, but were more entertained along the way. And then ultimately you came out the other end feeling good about it. And that's what people find persuasive. All to say, I don't know exactly what he thinks. I think that at the end of the day, the church teachings that he's upholding are very problematic and don't lead to great mental health outcomes. But I think there is I think he thinks that he's genuine, is probably how I would describe it. And I've met him in person. I know a lot of people that live down the street from him. So I grew up in Minnesota. He was like the local celebrity, and a lot of people that I know him and talk about him and his family growing up. And I've met him. And he comes across as a genuine guy, but I think at the end of the day, he still has to uphold church teaching and figure out how to cloak it nicely. I'm not sure if he'd arrive at the same conclusions if he didn't have to uphold church teaching.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and get into this. When we get off of this, I don't want to just talk about the LGBTQ issues, although you're
Yeah.
welcome to take as much platform as you need. I want to ask a lot about the traditionalism and what attracted you to that, because that's not some place that I've ever been attracted to. I'm a cradle Catholic. I left the church at 13. I came back at 33. Yeah, I know there's some ironic ages there. And I'm now 43. So I've been back in Catholicism for 10 years. I only discovered the Liturgy of the Hours and the Church Fathers about 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And that really took me from being a more liberal Catholic to a more I don't want to say traditional because I don't mean in that kind of way,
Yeah.
but I mean more Orthodox Catholic.
Yeah.
It was really pulled me across. But let's do that after the video. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. I'm going to mute myself. I recommend you do the same because I'll get a little icon. And
Yeah.
anytime you want to talk, just unmute it first so I have a chance to pause the video. Okay.
Perfect.
Before I spoke at Drew University in 2022, a group of students approached the administration and protested the decision to invite me. According to a news article, one woman read a tweet from Horn aloud, which stated, "I won't call a transgender woman she, because that is the opposite of a woman." Many students argued that this tweet was transphobic. Some critics, even those who are Catholic, have accused me.
So if you don't mind me asking, let's go with this first question. Do you think that tweet was transphobic?
Yeah, like, and so this is, I think, what's going to be the crux of the video is that like words mean whatever we agree that they mean. Words aren't like a descriptive or aren't a prescriptive thing, and we're like we can scientifically test what words mean. But I think when we talk about homophobia or transphobia, if we agree that those are bad things, the next step is like, what do we mean by those? And I think the test, especially as we go through this video, is like if we replace what he was saying but made it about race, would that be considered racist? Would probably be a litmus test of like how can we figure out like what would the average person think is homophobic. I think the tweet itself is, and we can probably get into these bigger issues here. I think the tweet is dumb. Like it's a lot of this like I'm gonna go on Twitter and like say something big and then get a bunch of responses. And so to say like I'm not gonna use the term she, the question is like I don't know, man. Like it's such an easy thing to do, to especially for somebody who's trans and very passing as trans. So to see somebody like Blair White and to like you have to go out of your way to say he. I get if we want to have like these debates about our pronouns when it comes to people who are new to their transition or whatever it is. But if we can't agree that somebody who looks like a girl that you would never know was assigned male at birth, if you would never know that apart from like a biology exam of them, like I don't know why we wouldn't just use she pronouns or whatever pronouns we think that person is, unless we have a bigger agenda that we have to invalidate people along the way.
Well, I don't think we want to get into a conversation about clocking and about whether or not we can tell or not. But I will say this on that tweet. I didn't think it was homophobic or transphobic. I did think it was incredibly immature. And coming from someone like Trent who argues for maturity all the time, it's a disappointment to see that on this topic, he can't seem to be the person that he's claiming to be. And that's another. And I noticed that under the topics, other people were calling him out for what you said, which is like, you are the one who's saying we shouldn't say Islamic things, Islamophobic things. You're the one who's saying we shouldn't say anti-Semitic things. And yet on this topic here, you're totally okay with everybody going, all out.
Yeah, and I think that's where we'll get into, like the average person is probably going to respect somebody else's pronoun. They might not fully agree, but like I think if we can agree on anything, it's like in speech, in conversation, unless somebody has some ulterior motive, we're probably going to respect how people identify. And so I think we could say that his tweet is shows that he has strong ideological commitments against transgenderism having space in personal conversations within society, within legal ramifications. And in every case, I think that Trent's underlying beliefs would be considered transphobic. So we could debate about the merits of the tweet, but if we agree that transphobia is anything, especially from either a legal or a commonly held perspective, all of Trent's beliefs line up both with transphobia and with homophobia. Now, if you want to say those words mean different things, sure, but I think in common speech, what Trent believes would be considered by a majority of people to fall into those two categories.
A very, I wouldn't say a small portion, but not a very large portion, but a very good portion, a very long portion of my audience, like a very long time subscribers, long time commenters are trans. So if one of them comes on, maybe after we do our interview, if you're still available, maybe if they want to come on, we can invite them in and they can also say their opinion.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and continue on.
Perfect.
Of being transphobic or homophobic. And here's my response to them. I don't care. I do not care. What I do care about is being.
What do you think about that before we even keep going? Don't go too long on it, but just what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's the meme of like, and then everybody clapped is like the I don't care, like rah rah, like you're cool, Trent. You stood up to the mob. Is like all he's talking to is two people that already agree with him and want to watch people get bludgeoned in the public square. And I think this is really endemic of like he said the quiet part out loud, which is he just doesn't care and makes up a new definition of what any of this means. Yeah, so like, and everybody clapped in the comment section, I think would be how we hoped that would go.
Charitable and loving towards all people, regardless of their sexual behavior or identity. I care about loving my neighbor, even if he really doesn't like what I have to say. I care about treating people with respect, but I have no respect for propagandistic labels like homophobia or its cousin transphobia. That's because these labels are often used to shut down Christians and bully them into abandoning their beliefs.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. I think.
If you're okay, let me go first on this one.
Perfect.
Because you seem to have a stronger opinion than I do. So let me give my lighter opinion, which is I think that's crap. I don't think, and I don't know if I know I watched this video already, and I had it planned for a different day, so I can't remember exactly if he got into this, but it reminds me of the opposite of what James Father Martin, what Father Martin does, which is he's implying that things could change, and the church is not going to change on this belief. This is not something that the church is going to, hey, you know what, tomorrow let's go ahead and we're gonna say homosexuality is not a sin. It's not going to happen. They're still going to say the acts of sin. They're still going to come down where they're not going to allow you know married priest or female priest. Like, these are the rules. So I feel this is the opposite, which is Trent's acting like an edgy teenage commenter. And it's like, that's not the case. The majority of the people in the United States have at least one gay person in their family. They have at least one friend who's transgendered, or someone who at least identifies as queer. So this is not one of those things where, oh, I'm going to be edgy and cool and I'm going to insult people. You know what happened to all the atheists who did that? They're no longer on YouTube. They're no longer famous. Yeah, it gives you a good spike, but just like Melanie Mack, yeah, you're going to be famous for like 5 hot seconds and then you're going to disappear. That's just my opinion. But again, I don't have as strong as opinion as you do, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points that we'll probably get into is like when he talks about all he cares about is caring about people and having their best interests at heart and having charity and all of these things. What he doesn't mean is I'm going to follow the science of what reduces negative or adverse mental health outcomes, what helps people preserve their rights, what helps reduce hate crimes, whatever it is. What he has to do is toe the line on the church because it can never change. And so even if all the scientific literature came out that there was a 100% self-harm rate in the queer community unless they were fully accepted, he still wouldn't change his mind. No matter what the science ever says about this issue, he will never change his mind. And it's very much like a game. The church has a wire frame, and a lot of apologists are almost doing this like paper mache type of like, how do we dress it up and how do we make it seem like we have a scientific stance, or how we arrived at our conclusions? How can we make it seem a little bit different? So I think part of this is like sidestepping a lot of the paper on the wire frame and going after the wire frame, which is like Trent isn't interested in the science. He's not interested in people's stories. There is no other piece of evidence, unless the church changed its mind, that he would ever reconsider what is good for people. And from all the scientific literature that we know, overwhelmingly shows that supporting people and affirming them in their identity and giving them access to mental and physical health treatment, that's what, by any objective standard, reduces harm. So when he talks about he cares about people's well-being, he cares about people's eternal well-being, but he does not care about their temporal well-being and wants to accompany and walk along and make it the best possible case. But at the end of the day, he could never change his mind, I think, is the important thing to remember about everything that Trent says.
Do me a favor when we're in the interview, because I'll forget, remind me to push back a little bit on affirming being the best solution, because in my life, for me personally, that was not the case. So I would love to have that conversation with you as well. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in this episode, I want to show why Christians should not give these terms respectability and should instead focus on the core issues of how we ought to treat one another, be it in a sexual or a non sexual context. If we allow these labels to invade our discourse about God's plan for our sexuality, they will completely undermine that plan. Here's an example of that from last month in the Yukon.
Yeah, so I think the thing to realize here is that if we swap these words to be anything else, whether it was talking about racism or sexism or any other like ism or big word out there, they know that if their beliefs get properly labeled or properly understood, very few people still agree with them. And so they have to sidestep the labels. And I think like it should probably give somebody pause if their beliefs are contradicting what the law of the land is when it comes to civil rights. I know that like when you read about, for example, like the original civil rights bill, it's like some of the arguments came down to be like, do you really want to be the guy who like voted against the civil rights bill? It's very interesting, like if you read some of those firsthand accounts of like how the first civil rights bill was passed. And so I get like when we talk about queer rights, or when we talk about gay rights or civil rights, like you can say like, oh, like we don't actually believe that there are civil rights because they're sins. But I think the important thing to remember here is that most of Trent's positions are going to contradict what the Supreme Court and what the country has agreed upon is our civil rights. And so he knows that he has to drop homophobia and transphobia and all these labels that like people don't want anymore, and figure out how to sidestep them, and then throw in this like religious freedom or this religious cloaking where it's a deeply held religious belief. And it's like nobody has a problem with Trent believing in the resurrection. Nobody wants to take away his right to speak because he talks about divine simplicity. It's not because he's Christian, it's because his beliefs are, by any objective standard, both transphobic and homophobic. And he's got to do this like religion backpedaling here. But if you just tell those beliefs apart from his religion, he would get absolutely dogpiled, more or less.
I'm not going to try to defend him as not homophobic. I know that he has come out very strongly in his Twitter and in his comments saying that he's not homophobic, that it's just simply his religious belief. But I don't think the attitude of I don't care is the right attitude for an apologist. I think it's fine if you're a Catholic at home and you're going to be a bigoted asshole. We're past the 30-second mark.
Yeah.
Whatever, like who cares? But if you're an apologist and you're representing the religion out loud, and I said this to Melanie Mack, and Melanie Mack and I ended up having like a 3-day argument on Twitter, which is if you're going to represent Christianity, you can't be putting out the F slur as an apologetical tool. That's not how it works. Jesus didn't go around, insulting the Palestinians or the I forget what they are at the time, but he didn't go out insulting them. He actually went out to the Samaritans and said, "Hey, come on, you're fine. You're one of us. Come on, come here. Now change your ways." Like, yeah, there is that caveat. There is the caveat of change your ways. There's the caveat of you can't sin again. And that's a big hurdle. That's a different hurdle than I'm going to start off by insulting you and then we'll be friends. It's going to be the superhero version of conversion. We're going to fight first and then we'll be best friends. That's not how it works in real life. And I know when I left the church at 13, I left because of the hypocrisy. I couldn't stand it. And I don't think most teenagers can. And I don't think you can justify that to the younger group that's coming. I'm old, but just from what I see, I don't think you can justify the hypocrisy to the younger group anymore, because there is Twitter, there is YouTube, there is whatever the new freaking thing's going to be tomorrow, where we can physically see video of people being homophobic, racist, and we can put them side by side and we can ask the question, hey, what's the difference here? And if there's no difference, you're not going to fool the younger audience anymore. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think if we play the game of like, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So I get that like Trent's not ever going to accept the label of homophobic, but I think if we polled the average person, when we talk about language as like a commonly shared meaning of a particular set of sounds that come out of your mouth, if we asked people and held Trent's position, would they think it's homophobic? Yeah. So I think we could say maybe Trent doesn't consider himself homophobic but by any secular agreed upon definition he is. And especially if you got beyond the like flowery language and like what are the policy positions, which is like you should be able to fire people for who they're married to, or that employers shouldn't have to respect people's rights to get married, like all these things. Like if you actually play his beliefs out, it's both going to contradict law, established case law from courts, and people's natural inclinations. So perhaps the better question than like, is Trent homophobic? It's like, would the average person consider him homophobic? Yeah, I think is how we could probably make a smarter question.
Did you read Dignity Infinity by any chance?
I have not.
I read it here on my channel live, and Dignitas actually has some really good caveats for how the Christian who has to follow the dogma should relate to other people. So the people who are very liberal were taking it completely the wrong way and saying it was completely, which it's not at all. And then the people who are very conservative were taking it completely the other way, saying, "Oh, see, it's supporting our," and it's not. The statement was walking the line perfectly. And it's a line that I feel Trent Horn has a problem walking. And I'm not trying to dog on Trent Horn. He's one of the reasons I went back to church. I do want to say something that I completely disagree with you on, which is Trent Horn has never convinced me of anything once. Never. There's not one argument I've ever heard from him that was good. Uh, he's had guests on his show back when he had a slightly different show.
Yeah.
He had guests on that have been convincing, but he himself, I've never found him convincing. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a former salesman, so I recognize salesman tactics. I'm not sure. All right, I'm going to keep going.
Yep.
Territory of Canada, where, according to this article, a textbook used for instruction at St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Secondary School in Whitehorse that contains content identified as homophobic is being pulled from classrooms, according to a statement from the Yukon government's cabinet communications team. Homophobia is usually defined as a kind of hatred or fear of people who identify as LGBT. So, what was so hateful in this textbook that it had to be pulled from the school? A previous news article from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
I just want to say, like, as you're listening to this, you're expecting to hear like why they pulled it is like something that's an absolute nothing burger. You're expecting like some like weak statement that you're like, oh yeah, these people are unreasonable. It's just like my impression as he built this up before I actually get to figure out what was actually in the textbook.
So I'm not I'm not a free speech absolutist anymore, but I used to be, and I do think there is a line. I do think some of the books that are out there, especially explaining how to have sexual relationships to younger people, I do think that does cross the line. I don't think a 12-year-old needs to have instructions on how to give oral sex. I do think that's weird. I do think that is a line that doesn't need to be crossed. But on the flip side, I don't think that just because a book is gay affirming should make it banned from a public library. It's not the Catholic Church. It's a public school. It has nothing to do with our religious dogmas. That's just where I'm at.
Quotes an angry letter from parents that started the controversy. This is not Catholicism. This is hate, reads the letter. Our children are not disordered. They deserve to feel safe in their classrooms. The article goes on to say, the letter is attached to several pages photocopied from a textbook titled Called to Happiness, Guiding Ethical Principles. The excerpted pages discuss moral law relating to human sexuality. It says homosexual acts are disordered and go against nature. The book similarly teaches against masturbation and using birth.
I'd like to get your take on that there, because I've said my opinion on the catechism before. I affirm the catechism, but do you think that language is outdated or should be updated? A lot of people, even apologists, get it wrong that somehow the catechism is almost dogma. It's not. It's just a handbook advising bishops how to answer questions. It's not supposed to be the answer book. Do you think that language should be updated, or do you think it should not even be there? What's your opinion?
I mean, I would say that I fundamentally disagree with it, and so like I could say like I don't want it there, but I think that the Catechism gives the clearest picture of what the church's understanding is. Like I would hate for somebody to like for the Catechism to be changed into all this flowery language, and then everybody thinks the church is accepting, and then they get hit over the back of the head after like they fully become Catholic. So I think it's accurate in that it's what the church believes. I think I fundamentally disagree with the church, but I appreciate that they're clear about it. In that when people talk about like what does the church believe, they can realize that like at the end of the day, this is what the church believes. Yeah, I don't know if that answer makes any sense.
If I can ask a follow-up before we hit play again, what's your opinion on people like Father Martin who are actively, seemingly actively trying to get the catechism to change? Do you think they're being false in their intentions, or do you think that they just don't get how the rest of Catholics view the catechism and view the level of authority it has in the mind of a Catholic?
Yeah, so and once again, like I can't exactly know what Father Martin thinks apart from everything that he said publicly. I'm appreciative of the fact that he's creating space within the church to for people to be able to openly talk about these issues without being kicked out of the church. That he wants to provide space for people to accept their identity in some fashion, and for the rainbow flag to not be this like emotional reaction where people absolutely hate it. Um, but at the end of the day, I still think that he's selling a false promise, which is that the church is going to change. We know the
I
church
agree.
is not going to change. And so, even though perhaps I like some of his antics and the space that he's making in the church, at the end of the day, I still wouldn't recommend for somebody who's experiencing same-sex attraction to listen to him because they're going to get this like the church is going to change and before the end of my lifetime. I'm going to be able to like go to mass with my boyfriend and be perfectly in line with church teaching, which is like you're not. And so perhaps I take like a harder stance against Father Martin than perhaps many LGBT affirming Catholics, which is like at the end of the day, he's still making false promises, which will never happen, and giving
Mhm.
people false hope. And I find that, I think from an objective standpoint, disingenuous. Do I think he is being nice and he has good intentions? Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you like really press him, he still believes in the church teaching, and that you can't be fully in line with church teaching and be actively gay.
Well, just to have my view out there, because I don't usually talk about him. In fact, I don't think I ever have. I disagree with him almost completely. I think he's a shyster. I think he's a liar, and I think he's going to damn a lot of souls. And I don't mean that in just the going to hell kind of way. I mean that as in psychologically damage people who are going to come into the church expecting one thing, and then they're going to get a completely different picture. And now they're going to be like, it's going to be like this internal struggle of acceptance. And it's like, dude, you just damaged this person more than you ever helped them.
Yeah, it's a very bait and switch type of thing where everything that like when you first read his stuff, what he's saying, like he's weaponized ambiguity. It's a very like weaponized ambiguity where it's like if you read him for the first time, you think that he purpose thinks that you should be able to get married to somebody of the same sex in the Catholic Church and that you'll be able to live a perfectly normal life. So to the outside world, they have very different beliefs than what he actually thinks. And so I think if we say that like what he's what what nearly everybody thinks about what he says and what he actually believes are not incongruity, we could say at the very least there's something very deceptive going on.
I do want to say this, that there is a parish where I live, a Catholic parish, where one of the priests is gay affirming. And we do have in that parish uh, gay couples coming in and celebrating the Mass. I haven't seen them receive communion as far as I can tell, and I wouldn't report that anyway. You know, like that's not really what I do. But I have seen that at this particular parish, and the priest is a great guy. I've talked to him personally. I've done interviews with him. I've had conversations with him. But my parish priest, the one that's actually in charge of me, is not as affirming. And I've talked to that priest, and I've made sure that everything that I'm saying is in line with what the bishop of my region says. So I'm very careful about that because I definitely don't want to be excommunicated. On that note, let's keep going. When it hits an hour, regardless of where we're at, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off, and then we'll start the interview from there after a brief break. Okay.
Birth control, also describing them as quote unquote disordered acts. And this is hateful. Here's the full context of the excerpt from that textbook, which has an imprimatur. From observing and studying the human body, a person can realize that the male and female bodies are different and that they are both sexually incomplete. Their sexual bodily differences serve a purpose. They enable the two bodies to unite in such a way that they can do together something which neither of them is able to do alone. They can form one sexual whole, which has the potential of bringing forth new human life. Our bodily differences, our sexuality are ordered to an end that we can figure out. They are ordered to procreation. This is one of the purposes of the sexual differences with which the Creator has fashioned us as human persons. Any sexual
Yeah, I'll let you go first
Yeah,
because I have plenty of thoughts.
I want to ask you, and maybe this question's a little bit of either baiting or begging, but I promise it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
What do you think about the argument of being called to celibacy? I know you've mentioned it, but I've heard that in this context before. As someone who likes women, even when I was sleeping with women, the priest, my dad, my family that's all Catholic, no one was telling me, hey, be celibate. They were just like, it's a sin, right? Okay, good. Okay, fine. Do whatever you're gonna do. And then they would celebrate it. You know what I mean? It's not like they were like, oh no, you can't have a girlfriend. No, they would, they'd be like, hey, all right, yeah, you got a girl. So it seems hypocritical. And I don't mean the church policy. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about on the family, lay level of being a Catholic, that you're going to ask your gay son to be celibate, but you're going to celebrate your straight son having tons of girlfriends. Both of them are committing a sin. Like it's not like, oh, it's not like, hey, the straight son's doing a good thing by going out and using a condom and having sex. No, that's still condemned. So I just think that on the lay level, there's a level of hypocrisy, and I would even say judgment there that is unfair to the and it's also I'm going to say this before you go. Uh, there's also a difference, especially in Hispanic communities, and I think also in Italian communities, where the gay son actually will be put down a little bit, and the lesbian daughter will actually be lifted up a little bit in that weird hierarchy of, you have straight son up here, lesbian daughter here, and then gay son down here, and it's like, what is that about? I'll let you speak. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think if we could say, like, what would be some parameters around establishing homophobia is probably going to be one is that if two people are in the exact same situation, but the gender of their partner is switched, meaning like for a man to sleep with a woman outside of wedlock or for a man to sleep with a man outside of wedlock, if they have two drastically different responses from people on a local level, probably most likely built out of a sense of disgust or disdain, or that initial emotional reaction to the fact that their son is with another man when they wouldn't have that same thing if their son was with a woman. I don't know what else between a double standard and a negative emotional reaction. I don't know if homophobia is anything, it would certainly be that. So when we talk about like if we just switched the genders and they're in the exact same situations, if they're different, that would seem discriminatory. Now, I think Catholics would say it's discriminatory because when we look at the levels of sexual sin, Thomas Aquinas has a lot of really horrendous works on like what are the worst types of sins ranked in order. I have no other response than that is homophobic. And then I think when we get into like this text, like I said, like Trent was building this up to be like these parents wanted to pull something that was homophobic and it was a giant nothing burger and just one illustration of a straight couple and they didn't like adequately use 800 different pronouns. It was like what I was expecting him to say. And then as we're talking about calling homosexual acts disordered, yeah, like straight up, like I don't know what else to call somebody who's gay to call their activities disordered. If homophobia is anything, it's certainly that. When we're rooted inside of like flowery language, once again, and I think I've talked about this in videos, it's all hypotheses, which are just these assertions that like is that sex ought to involve the uniting of two people in the opposite sex, so we have the procreation of offspring as a possibility. If I just said the opposite of sex ought to involve two people of the same sex so that they can form, and so like whatever it is, like these are just assertions that are thrown out there. These aren't evidence, these aren't arguments. If I can say the opposite thing and we can just hit bedrock and can't argue, that's probably a sign that we have a kind of a bad argument that we're going at it with. And so I think when we talk about the complementarity of the sexes and what sex is united or what sex is designed for, are just more or less really big word salads that sound flowery but are devoid of any argument. So when we don't have arguments and then call things disordered, and I get that we can talk about it in an Aristotelian sense of the word, but what people hear when they hear same-sex acts are disordered, I think the average person is going to go, yeah, that is homophobic. So Trent built this up to be a big nothing burger when I think it is something bigger than just a nothing burger. Like, what are people mad about? Like, I don't know, either Trent's dumb or he doesn't know that people, like, when they hear themselves being called disordered, have a reaction to that.
So you actually said something in there, and we'll do this during the interview if I get around to it. But it's actually the exact reason why I reached out to you and why I wanted to have this conversation. So again, this part of the video is not meant for it, but I just want to bring it up, which is you're saying that the argument isn't there or isn't good. There's no bedrock for the argument. And for me, I'm someone who I come from a very open, very liberal, very hedonistic style. I was a Taoist for 15 years. I was a Taoist a lot longer than I was a Catholic. So coming back into religion, it was reading the church fathers, he was reading the Didache, and it was reading what the tradition has said about these things. So Trent Horn saying, homosexuality is disordered, that didn't convince me of nothing. But seeing that, the Didache has rules, and seeing that certain church fathers, whether it's Origen or John Chrysostom or Augustine or Jerome, have sexual ethics in mind when they're doing their writings, that has had a very powerful impact on the way that I live my life. So I don't want to get into that now, but I do want, if we get a chance, I do want to get into that, because that is actually one of the reasons why I reached out to you.
Yeah, and I think if we're stuck on the top of the hour on the video, we could maybe even skip ahead as he starts talking about like the next Benedict case. He talks a little bit more about this case, which I think we've given our thoughts. Um,
How should a
yeah, or
Catholic
maybe
respond? Tell me where.
yeah. Let's
Tell me
go
where.
into let's go to how Catholics should respond, because he more or less makes the argument that like if just holding the church's position is homophobic, it makes the average Catholic homophobic, which I think he says in that section
Yeah.
there.
Well, just to be clear, like I don't think this was I don't think this was his best video anyway. So, but I do want to talk about, actually, the original way that I was going to do this before I reached out to you is I was going to play 2 of Dan McCullen's videos countering his opinion, and then play his opinion, and then play another pastor that I thought did a better job on the same topic. So, all right, I'm going to hit play.
Full Catholic must be homophobic, because this is just what the church teaches. This is why I refuse to answer questions like, are you homophobic? Or is transphobia sinful? They're loaded questions designed to generate heat rather than light. They don't deserve a yes or no answer. We should instead say, I'm a faithful Catholic. I don't hate or fear anyone. What do you think the answer to your question is? By doing that, we move the discussion away from ourselves and towards the larger issue of whether the critic accepts or rejects what the Catholic Church teaches. Once again, in today's world, any disapproval of LGBT sex.
Yeah, so it talks for like 2 or 3 minutes here, which is more or less like if simply disagreeing with homosexuality is homophobic, then are all Catholics homophobic? It's kind of like the middle section to this video. And I think if we flip the question on its head and said, if the church, like if a Mormon from 1970 said, "Oh, African Americans can't receive the priesthood because God said so," and you say that's racist, and they say, "No, it's because God said so, so it can't be racist." You would say, "No, it's still racist. Like if it walks like a duck and it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, like it's probably a duck." And so, regardless of what the origin is, and I think in American culture, in American context, religion is and spirituality is seen as a desired trait, and sort of like hides certain beliefs behind religion, almost gives it like a certain like, well, you're criticizing my religion. The answer is like I really could not care less about what Trent thinks about insert whatever dogma from like a legal perspective. But when he's like, when these beliefs mean that he would vote against gay marriage if it were up for election, I really don't care what his religion says. I think we need to evaluate the beliefs apart from any sort of supernatural like defense, and just say, yeah, to oppose gay marriage, to oppose people being able to live normal lives, to oppose using or to oppose recognizing people's identity and the pronouns that they want to use. Like, yeah, it's transphobic and homophobic if somebody said the exact same things but without religion. I don't think that religion gives you a pass to believe whatever you want, and get away from any labels of those beliefs having impacts on other people's lives.
So I have a slightly different take, obviously, but for me, it's a problem not just of approach, but it's a problem of hypocrisy within the mind. And let me tell you what I mean by this. So with Trent, he's saying, okay, we cannot affirm this because it will lead to scandal and it will lead to the destruction of the culture or whatever. But at the same time, he wouldn't treat a drug addict the way that he's treating LGBTQ people. He wouldn't treat a murderer the way he's treating LGBTQ people. He wouldn't treat a rapist the way that he's treating LGBTQ people. He will argue for forgiveness, for redemption. He will argue that the dignity of the person must be preserved, and therefore you have to treat them with love and respect, even as you're disagreeing with them. And then he'll turn around and then turn to the LGBTQ person and say, you know, you're sinful, you're going to hell, you're damned, but I love you. Like it's like he can't hear that. Here's his entire, basis for his philosophy. I'm not talking about his theology, his philosophy, and then he's flipping it for one group. And it's like, hey, that doesn't work. If you're going to treat the worst of humanity this way, then someone whose only sin is a sexual attraction, which is not even a sin in the church, it's the action that's the sin. You got to treat them with the same amount of respect that you'll treat every human being at least. And if you can't get there, then you're the problem, not the person with the attraction. To me, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about the responsibility or even the cognizance that somebody should have about how their message is interpreted. If everybody who hears your message thinks a certain thing about it, it's not that I say like it's morally on you, but like you should really consider like, oh, if I'm saying these things and like I believe one thing and what people hear is something very different, like maybe I should figure out a different way of explaining this if people get very different understandings of what I just said. I think that's somewhere like a Father Mike or some of the other speakers out there that like they know how their message is interpreted and they're very careful about it,
Mhm.
especially for such a hot button issue. And I don't think that Trent does anybody a service or convince anybody who doesn't already agree with him. Um, of his position because his position people don't fully understand because they're wrapped up in the I don't care if I'm homophobic, which to anybody out in the culture is going to hear one thing. Catholics might hear a different thing, but that's where we just have this whole game of double speak where how Catholics and how non-Catholics talk about the world mean very different things.
Well, I
Um,
don't think this is just a Catholic problem. So the majority of people are going to hell. And I've read I've been reading a lot of the church fathers, the early church fathers. I got a whole thing going on. The default is going to hell. It's very few people that would be going to heaven. So even the person in the pew next to you, no matter how much they go to church, they're probably going to have a mortal sin that they're not going to confess before they die. They're going to hell, and you're going to treat them decent. You don't know that the person who's LGBTQ is going to hell. You literally don't know. So to treat them like they're less than because of their attractions or because of their current actions, when someone who's a thief right now actively stealing from them, you're stealing from you, you're saying, hey, but you can be redeemed, and you're not saying that to the person who has LGBTQ identified, especially someone who's Q identified. You're talking about someone who's living a straight lifestyle by your definition. By their definition, they're queer. Fine. But it's still a male and female relationship in your eyes. There's absolutely nothing in their actions, especially if they're ace and they're not sexually active. There's nothing in their actions outside of how they're dressing that's offensive to you, and yet you're condemning them to hell because they don't want to convert into your theology. To me, that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think the reason why a lot of these issues are so hot button is really this tribal mindset where I think about the fraternity parish that I went to. Our priest got arrested for I'll say terrible internet crimes, like really terrible crimes, and everybody in my parish still supported him and gave him the benefit of the doubt because he still felt like one of us. He still said all of the right things. People trusted him. Versus, I think like in a group that's traditionally apart from the Catholic Church. The problem isn't necessarily their actions; it's that they are not part of the same in group. And so, to your point, like if your son who's faithfully Catholic sleeps with a woman, you're not going to have a huge reaction because it's just like a sin, but he's still part of the group. But if the child left the faith or slept with somebody of the same sex, whatever it is, I think we have this huge like emotional gap because it's this like, are you part of our tribe or not? And I think somebody like Joseph Chiambra, who's big kind of in the traditional world, who was openly accepted as an ex-gay, if he didn't toe the line and say all the traditional things about the Rosary and Saint Joseph, I don't think that he would have had the same acceptance within the trad community. If he just said, "I experienced same-sex attraction" and didn't toe the line, he'd be seen as an outcast. But it's this game of like, do you say the right things? And to that degree, you have a certain leniency of being able to like sin however you want because you've proven you're one of us. Is why I think a lot of these discussions boil down to is this in group versus out group mentality.
For violence upon those who identify as LGBT. This is wrong and sinful. For example, Christians should never use slurs like the F word when referring to people who identify as LGBT. We should also not think that these individuals are less deserving of God's love and our charity than anyone else. In 1986, Mother Teresa founded the Gift of Peace in Washington, D.C., a hospice dedicated to comforting men dying of AIDS. A 1987 Washington Post article reveals that many people protested the facility because they mistakenly thought AIDS could be transmitted through the air, though some simply opposed caring for these men because they had engaged in gay sexual acts. The article said, others disapprove of the fact that the home is caring for gay men. AIDS comes because of immoral acts, said the Reverend William Witt. Why is it doing charity work to bring them in? If anything is homophobia, this is homophobia. No matter what a person has done in his or her life, he or she deserves to be comforted at the hour of death. I reject labels like homophobic because they turn everything into hatred, even gentle moral correction. And if everything is hateful, nothing is hateful. Saying the textbook
And if everything's a meme, nothing's a meme.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that people play around with, like, what is or what isn't racist, and I generally think if there's a whole bunch of people calling you something, you should probably stop and really consider what your position is. And as much as he wants to, like, everybody talks about, like, Mother Teresa in this weird context when they talk about, interviews of like, "Oh, she was nice to gays," and then you're like, "So what did the average 1960s Catholic think?" And you're like, "Okay." So and this is the game where, like, if all of Catholics hold a position, it's like cool. And if it's relevant, we're like, oh, Catholics agree that blank. And if it's a good thing, they tout that. But then if a majority of Catholics disagree, say 100 years ago, when it comes to like not ordaining African American men to the priesthood in America, it's like, well, actually, the problem wasn't with all of the Catholics. The church actually believed it was anti-racist along the way. That the church really held these beliefs, and they'll cite Mother Teresa, and you're like, clearly the Catholic Church was not the one like fighting against an emotional reaction and disgust when it comes to homosexuality. Like Mother Teresa said some things. Cool. What did everybody else on planet Earth say at that time? And we can't play this game of reverse engineering Catholic positions, saying now we're the good guys, when historically that position has never been held by a majority of Catholics. Especially if you want to say that like we're infallible, we can say things definitively, and the church has authority. It's like if I were God, circa 500 years ago, and God was this really awesome guy who can give us moral prescriptions and clarity. Like there's probably some big moral issues decades ago or centuries ago when it comes to these things that would have been so much easier if God just came out of the woodwork and said, "Hey, like don't own slaves." Would have been like a great church document to have. But instead, we have like this semblance of random church documents. You're like, see, the church was against it the whole time. And in the same way, oh, hold on, what just happened here? And I think in the same way, when we talk about anything else in the church when it comes to like homophobia, it's like what does the average Catholic think and why do they think that?
And your
I think
sound
there's
is
a
still good, by the
consideration.
way. It's just your image is
Oh,
gone.
that's good. Let's see if I can figure out what.
While you're figuring that out, let me go ahead and talk a little bit.
Mhm.
So for me, so there's a few things that you said there that made me think of things. And one of the things that made me think of is when modern traditionalists and modern apologists, not so much the Catholic Answers crew, they're usually pretty good on this, is when they're trying to defend witch burnings. And it's like, yeah, you now don't believe there are real witches, and yet you're justifying the burning of witches because it somehow protected Christendom, which fell apart anyway. And these were either crazy people who thought they were witches and they weren't. They were uneducated people who thought they had the power to control the universe, which they don't. Or they were innocent people who were falsely accused for either political or social reasons. And so therefore, that's wrong in general. You can't just go kill an innocent person just because you don't like them. So even if you can say, well, in theory, protecting Christendom from witchcraft is good, so it doesn't influence our children, in actuality, you're just killing innocent people because there's no such thing as magic anyway. So it's a real dumb argument. And I think that happens here when you're talking about the broader LGBTQ community. If you want to argue that, homoousios and all this stuff, like, hey, that word means man better, and in this section in here it says, women exchange their attractions for unnatural attractions, whatever. But when you want to talk about what's actually going on, it seems like you're just victim blaming, and I think that's the wrong approach. Here we go. Okay.
The last thing that I kind of wanted to run through here is I forget exactly where in the video, and we can search for it. He talks specifically about the Next Benedict case, which I think is indicative of a callous and perhaps arguably monstrous.
Is it there?
Yeah, can you still hear me? Let me see if I can. It's somewhere in that middle section.
Can you
You can,
just tell me where?
let's see. Actually, hold on. Let me search for a timestamp. In the video, you should be able to search the transcript right on YouTube. Let me pull it up here. See if I can
And then
find it.
after this section, we'll go ahead and take a little short break, and then we'll go ahead and switch into the interview, and we'll be a little bit more antagonistic, but not by much. I think we get along pretty good.
Perfect. Let me just, I think I'm narrowing down onto the timestamp. Let me just search by. So if we go to the 6-minute mark on the dot.
6-minute mark on the dot. All right, here we go.
Are disordered. In 2024, an Oklahoma high school student named Next Benedict died, non-binary, and one article said Oklahoma banned trans students.
I'm going to talk a little bit through this, and it's okay if it ends up making it go a little bit long. I usually do talk about these things as soon as they pop on the radar. I did not because of the LGBTQ aspect of it, but because I was brutally picked on as a teenager. So
Yeah.
for those that don't know, before I had the muscles and the chubbiness and the little scruffy beard, I was a sissy, and I got picked on for being a sissy. And I got brutally picked on. My friends were African American. My friends were what now we would call queer, but they weren't called that at that time. We were just, I don't know what the word was, but basically goth. They would just put it all under the blanket of goth back then. And we had rocks thrown at us. We got spit on. It was brutal. My girlfriends would get accused of being sluts just because they liked the guy who was friends with this community. And I lost my position on the football table because I went to go sit at the unpopular table to go hang out with these people. It was a whole thing. So I did not speak on that because I'd been through that situation, and I initially thought that there was more to the story than what was being reported. Not that anything justifies a kid offing themselves. I'm going to say self-delete to keep this channel good, on good terms. And it also doesn't justify the bullying. If you think someone started a fight for no reason in that environment and you think that changes the LGBTQ factor, it does not. As someone who's been in these situations, when and I got in trouble one time for this, is that I saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my friends get beat up one after another. I then went after the guy before they could beat me up. Guess what? I got kicked out of school. I was the bad guy for that. But it wasn't like it was completely unagitated. There are other factors, especially when you're talking about teenagers and you're talking about junior high and early high school. The social factors are so heavy that I did not feel comfortable speaking on that, because even if they somehow had a film of everything from beginning to end and they put it all out there, those factors are way too complicated to just say it's an LGBTQ issue, to just say it's a bullying issue. And so that's why I didn't speak on it. I just want to say that first before you go.
Yeah, and I think that Trent's never going to agree on the specifics of this case. And so I think, moving away from particularly this case, I think my problem, and perhaps the worst moral offense that I see in his entire video, is the deliberate misgendering of a child who died. Like, I don't care how you think that they died. I don't care what you think about the discourse surrounding their death. But at the end of the day, this is somebody who, by every account out there, was non-binary, and used they, them pronouns. And Catholics generally agree that you can either just use the person's name and substitute instead of using pronouns, or using that singular they. So him deliberately saying she, to say that she was reported as non-binary, he's not oblivious to it. He also knows what he's doing here. He scripted this out beforehand, and he's been engaged in these debates. And that is a deliberate calculation to use she to have one last final jab at somebody who's no longer alive. I think in the same way that if, like, an atheist showed up to Trent Horn's child's funeral, if God forbid something happened to one of his children, and Trent gave a discourse about how he has hope for the future and heaven and how wonderful of a child his child was, and then some atheist was like, well, God doesn't exist and heaven doesn't exist, and your child's rotting in the ground, everybody would be sickened. It doesn't matter what you believe. We're talking about people who've passed away. And I get that this got caught up in discourse, but him using she pronouns for somebody who he knew preferred using they to misgender a dead child, I think, is absolutely sick and indicative of this entire video, or he'll cloak this up at the end of the day. But I find that to be the most offensive part of this entire video, is he can't bring himself to use somebody's pronouns who tragically died, regardless of what he thinks happened in this situation.
So I want to bring up another aspect that Trent doesn't acknowledge, this is not even a religious issue, just a social issue that when he talked about it initially pissed me off, which is the people who picked on me in junior high before I got my muscles and they were no longer picking on me. Those guys, they're all gay now. So there's a lot of self-hatred that happens there. There's a lot of self-turmoil that's going on inside. And that self-hatred gets expressed, whether it's coming from the parents to the kid or whether it's just internal to the kid. Like the parents could be completely affirming and the kids still hate themselves. That's coming out, and that's coming out in that situation. Um, no BS. I once had people show up with baseball bats outside of my house because I was different. And then a few years later, they individually, all at different times, came up and apologized. One of them said, "Hey, I'm." He said that he was gay. Another one said that he was having drug issues. Another one said he was having fights with his parents at home, and he just wanted to take it out on someone. And I'm like, "Hey, that's fine, but you're still an ass. Like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't awesome." Luckily, nothing happened. I mean, luckily, I was fine. But they could have destroyed their lives because of their self hatred. And that's a factor that no one addressed in this story. Everyone, especially those 3 days of, was throwing blame to the other side. Like, oh, this is the ideology damaging them. Oh, these are uh, the straight people damaging them. This is the policies damaging them. And it's like, no, like these are real people with real internal turmoil. How would we talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know how we can divorce this particular case from the broader narrative, especially happening in Oklahoma schools, with their key administrator actively wanting to drive out any mention of LGBT topics from the classrooms, having this emotional reaction to it. The discourse, especially in southern states, being a disgust or a disdain or this groomer type narrative that we cannot have anything pride related, anything about accepting yourself in schools. And so I get that like Trent Horn's not the one personally going into this bathroom to beat somebody up. But I think when we talk about pushing people out and otherizing people and having a disgust, I
I
don't
mean,
know
he
how
does know
else this
jujitsu.
culminates. Yeah, that's true. Every Catholic man does do jujitsu. I don't know if you know Trent Horn's wife has a great comedy YouTube channel. She has these like 2 minute shorts. They're quite funny. But when it comes to like this situation, like I get that we can like we might disagree on the facts of the case and we can't always go back. But if we talk about like if we switch this around of like if everybody in Oklahoma public schools was super pro-gay and hated Christians and talked about we can't have any religion, not only in general taught, but like we can't even have Christians in the school and we should bully Christians and we should have an emotional disgust to Christians. And then lo and behold, a Christian after a day after a fight with people who hated them was found dead. Like, I don't know how else we would talk about this
Well,
situation. And I,
I
yeah,
think your analogy is a little bit incorrect there because I
yeah,
think even if the child, even the same situation that you just described, a completely anti-Christian school, if the kid was LGBTQ identifying or MB or anything, they would then turn around, the Christian community would turn around and say, "See, that's an example of why we can't have this." So you don't even have to go with your analogy of like, "Oh, what if it's a Christian?" No, in the exact same situation, they're still going to be blaming the ideology that they don't understand and not the internal turmoil or whatever was going on, socially or not.
yeah. And I think that, especially in the way Trent talks about this case, is indicative of the fact that he can never change his beliefs. He can never have what people consider common decency. He can never respect what people think, or in cases in which we have actually dead children on our hands, he cannot change his identity even after somebody dies in a situation. He cannot change, which I think if we can call transphobia or homophobia, holding on to older beliefs, perhaps without justification, but never being able to change them in any situation, in any context, for any reason, at any point in the future. They have to continue attack of both disrespecting individual people and disrespecting how they want to identify, talking about broader cultural narratives, where it's always the Christians who are the good guys. And then on a legal level, to like, I got to imagine that like Trent's not going to be passing the Equality Act anytime soon. That if any civil rights protections came up for queer folks, that he would vote against it. I think when we go from like the intellectual level, the individual level, the societal level, and the legal level, when he has what anybody would consider homophobic and transphobic beliefs, and none of those can ever change, I have no conclusion to draw other than Trent is homophobic and transphobic, by any standard that more than 2 people out of a room of 1,000 people actually hold.
So we were not here to interview Trent Horn with him not being able to answer us. So I think I'm going to call the video. I'm going to call this watch along portion of the video here. We're going to go ahead and take a 1-minute break. And then I don't have my usual setup. My usual setup's actually StreamYard, so I have all this like cool graphics. I'm just going to get up and get some water, and I'm going to turn on the fan, and then we'll come back in about 1 minute exactly. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Say something so I can make sure the headphones are still going.
Perfect. I'm talking here about things and whatnot.
All right. So now this is going to be an interview, not a debate. I am going to push back a little bit on depending on what you say or don't say. Let me just switch the camera over here so that way it looks like I'm looking at you instead of watching the videos.
Yeah.
Okay. See, there we go. All right. Oh, chat is way too big. Okay. Oh, you're not going to let me adjust it, you piece of crap machine. Okay, there we go. All right. So, like I said, I will be pushing back on some of the things you say, but this is going to be more of an interview. And feel free to say whatever you want. The only thing that I ask, and I ask this of all my anti-theist and atheist guests, just don't say GD. As long as you don't say GD, you can say anything you want. Any slurs, okay. Just no GDs, please.
Oh,
Okay.
that took me. I was like, "What are we doing?" Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start off with if you can reintroduce yourself real shortly, and who and what you represent, and why you're out here trying to present a message. What is your goal by coming onto channels like mine and coming to channels like, I believe it was X Cath Trad or something like that?
Kevin Non-Tradicath. Yeah.
Kevin Non-Tradicath. That's a hard name to say. That's worse than
It
Alpha
is.
Centaurian.
He this is sort of like Tradicath is like such a niche term that to the outside world it just looks like a password, but to the people that use terms like rad trad and stuff, it's like, oh, that makes sense. But yeah, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I grew up in like a mildly Catholic household. Perhaps a faithful Catholic would call it a heretical one. So it was never taken seriously. From an early age, I realized that I was attracted to men, but never felt comfortable telling
Are you
other
a cradle
people.
Catholic or no?
By definition, it's like I grew up going to Catholic mass. I think a faithful Catholic is going to say I was never catechized properly, but I went to
But
a
you were
Catholic
baptized as a
elementary
baby?
school. Correct, yeah. Baptized, first reconciliation, first communion, confirmation, all of the sacraments in a liberal but still faithful parish is probably how I would describe it. Um, and so I grew up around Catholicism and went to Catholic elementary school K through sixth grade. It was a little more on the liberal side, where it's more or less just a glorified private school that has a
Mm.
priest that walks through the hallways like once a month. Um,
So I'll
and
ask
then
you about your
yeah,
sexuality in a second. Let's lay off on that a little bit. But what is the message that you're trying to send out to the masses, and what is your mission, or what are you trying to do with your YouTube channel? And I believe you have a TikTok as well that's now going to disappear when that disappears. Go to Kick. Just do Kick. That's what I recommend.
I don't know if the kick people are going to be too keen to have, but it's something to add. TikTok was blowing up today. I went from like 8 followers to like 1,200 and tons of
Wow,
messages.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I just put up the series that
Congratulations.
I put on YouTube, and we're at like 20, 30,000 views, 500 or 600 hours of watch time, tons of private messages. So it's resonating. So I think like we can have like two different ones, which is like one is the intellectual, I think, and then one is the like what is really the core of the emotions here is that I went through life being unconfident in my identity, not feeling a ton of shame, but not knowing what to do, feeling confused, feeling alone. And the Catholic Church, though it has, we'll say, parameters around what is okay and what is not okay, that I never found really solid answers of like, how should I live out life as a chaste Catholic who experiences same sex attraction? There's so much infighting within the church of like, there's not like this is completely kosher and this is not kosher. There is from like a book perspective, but like how is this lived out? Um, and in leaving that, I think kind of like the emotional side to my message is especially for people that were in my own shoes, which is like, hey, following the Catholic Church is going to be a really, really big thing to do and is a really, really big thing to commit to. And your life will look very different to follow all of the church's teachings, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, but especially if you are in the queer community. And I think the Catholic Church recognizes that, like, hey, this is a pretty big call. I think that after investigating the claims, the church doesn't have the amount of proof that it needs to prove such a unchangeable church teaching, and that after having left Catholicism, I'm more at peace. I love my life now more than I did before, and all the things that I thought I was going to lose when I left religion, I still generally have and have to a higher degree. And
So
that I
let's
think,
let's let's
yeah,
stop you there, and so we
perfect,
can keep going.
yeah,
Um, what attracted you to radical traditionalism? Because that's something that I've always been against,
yeah.
whether I was a liberal Catholic or whether I was like now more conservative Catholic. It has never appealed to me. So what appealed to you? What about that appealed to you?
Yeah, so I think from like the aesthetic side, the Latin Mass, and I still hold, is absolutely beautiful. The chant and the smells and the liturgy, it's something imbued with meaning. It's something that's by any standard beautiful. It puts you at peace. It's something otherworldly. It's something that you never get in any other context in life. Do you go to a very ornate room with beautiful music to smell and to see things that are said to have a ton of meaning and to have this sense of direction. So I think there was like the Latin Mass, and even now I still find beautiful, and there's so much peace within it, and there's so much meaning, and there's so much history in it, and so much like emotions that come along with it. And I think in the traditional movement as well, I think in any religion has answers. Answers that allow you to have a sense of direction, that allow you to have a sense of purpose, that allow you to feel like you're making a difference in the world, that don't you don't have to think quite as deeply about like what should I or shouldn't I do for every aspect of life. It allows you to have this like highway of how to travel, and then nestled inside of like the aesthetics and the sense of direction, like you have this amazing community around you, and you build friendships that are almost unmatched in any secular context out there. It's
Let
probably how
me
I'd
ask
approach
you.
that. Yeah,
Let me ask you a few questions around that. I'm gonna ask you maybe three.
yeah.
The first one would be: were you SPX, or were you a set of a contest, or were you like just traditional Catholic?
I attended fraternity parishes in every state that I lived in. So I was a big fan of the fraternity, flirted a lot with like Sedeve Comp as an intellectual concept, but ultimately couldn't get myself to like say to the priest that I knew that like, hey, you're not actually Catholic. But I did have probably half a year where I was like, I'm probably sedevacantist, but quickly snapped out of that. And so I would say I was a fraternity parish is what I went to. That's where I donated. That's where I spent all of my time. Those are the priests that I listened to.
So considering that, one of my problems with the more rad trad types is that they remind me of the, I'm going to say the only the last name here, the Fuenteses in the world, because I don't want this channel suppressed. Um, were you worried that that kind of macho religion, as Matt Fradd likes to say, was going to be more red meat, more racist, more white affirming, more Anglo affirming, more Protestant affirming, considering that they are rad trad, as they're supposed to be super Catholic, but the people who they are attracting are the people who are the far right of the Catholic faith. They're not liberals.
Yeah, I think I wasn't super into the political ramifications of what I was doing, especially being younger. You get sucked into this discourse, which is
At how
especially the
old? At how
stream.
old?
I would have been 17-ish at the time as I like
Mhm.
really got into tradition. So from like probably about 17 to
So still smart
19.
enough to
Yeah,
know better.
yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I saw those strains, but I think in the reason, and perhaps what I tend to rail against is this dogmatic thinking, which is like, if we are correct, it really doesn't matter the ramifications because we're not making a value judgment. We're making a declaration of like, this is the way to do religion. This is going to save souls. And when we have this like heaven or hell paradigm, even if like we have some collateral damage, it doesn't really matter because people are going to go to heaven. And so yeah.
And now let me get a little bit of your theological background here, so that way we can make sure that we're communicating on the
Yeah.
right level. Have you read the Catechism? Have you read the Bible? And are you familiar with any church fathers or any tradition?
Yeah, so I've read both the Bible and the Catechism, doing the Bible and Catechism. It wasn't Father Mark's variation, but I've read both of those cover to cover on a number of times. And when it comes to the Green Catechism, I read it, fully believed everything, and actually started swaying more towards the Baltimore Catechism. So I think I'd probably take issue with some of the more like liberal aspects of, let's say, the Green Catechism. But at the end of the day, still ascribing to that.
Have you
And I'm
read both the the Catechism of Trent, and the modern U.S. Catechism that's out there?
Yes, I've read the USCCB's publication, so the Green Catechism with all the
Mm.
paragraphs. I've read that. I've read the Baltimore Catechism, but I've not read the Catechism of the Council of
Have
Trent.
you read any of the Vatican documents? That's one of the books that flew around. My dad was, I guess I should say, but
Yeah,
Knight of Columbus. So yeah, so we have all those books.
yeah, I've read probably most of the papal encyclicals for the past 150-ish years, Humanae Vitae, um, what Cassie Canubi, a number of those bigger documents on church teaching and would ascribe to them. Yeah, so I've done that. I've probably read just about everything from the Catholic Answers bookstore. Thoroughly like that. I love Jimmy Akin's book on the early church fathers. It's like 800 pages. I haven't read it cover to cover, but I'm familiar with those church fathers and their teachings. And that's a book. If you're ever looking at church fathers and need to like proof text something, Jimmy Akin's book is really good about laying together like the early church and how the fathers thought about Catholic
And
beliefs.
then one last question on this topic before we're going to switch over to sexuality, and what
Mhm.
then from there we'll switch over to what your disagreements are with the Catholic Church. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, when you were reading all of this material and when you were going through it, did you object to it at the time, or or you can fully convinced that this was the correct and this was the real truth?
Yeah. After my initial like investigating the church for 6 to 12-ish months in ninth grade, by the time I hit 10th grade, so was that 16, 15, 16. From then onwards, hook, line, and sinker, fully believing that this was the truth, the objective truth, and everything else beyond that did not contain the fullness of the truth.
Real quick, do you have any degrees in theology or philosophy or anything like that?
I was pursuing an undergraduate degree in theology and philosophy when I was attending a college, and attended a year and a half, depending on how you look at their academic calendar, but was from at a Newman Guide approved Catholic college. So we were learning like this actually is what how every Catholic is educated. Yeah, fully in line with that. I didn't end up completing the degree because I dropped out of college entirely. But yeah, was learning from those types of people.
So was there anything other than sexual ethos issues that turned you away from the Catholic Church?
Not after my initial objections.
Okay. So now let's get into the sexual aspect. And what is your sexuality? Is that the only factor of why you're not currently Catholic, or are there other issues that have transposed into and intermixed in with your rejection of Catholicism?
Yeah, so I'd be I am a gold star gay, meaning that like I've only been interested in men and have only ever dated men, or technically only ever dated one man. But for the entirety of my life, if we talk about like the Kinsey curve, I'm like all the way to the gay end. There's like no confusion in my mind. And when it comes to like my objections to the faith, because I was in a very Thomistic tradition, loved the Dominican way of thinking, and the scholastic way of thinking. I didn't leave because I was like, oh, I want to be, I want to live a gay lifestyle. It was that was kind of the tipping point in that it made me look again at why the church taught what it taught. Not just that, so like the church has answers to everything. The question is like, can it back up those answers? So I kind of started deconstructing, really looking at sexuality in particular. But I think by far my biggest objections to Catholicism mainly come down to dogma and a lot of that like epistemological conceptions of the world, how we know truth, in a very top-down approach is by far my biggest gripe with how the Catholic Church talks about the world.
And so that's something I want to concentrate on, but let me get a few more foundational questions
Yeah.
out of the way. Um, so for you, why not just go to a church that's gay affirming, or go to a liberal, a progressive church, or even a Lutheran church that has, for them, legitimate sacraments, even if we think those sacraments are trash, they think they're real. Why not go that route? Why become an atheist or agnostic?
Yeah, I think if there's one common theme across my journey, both in and out of religion, is that I've always wanted to be ideologically consistent and follow what I thought was the truth. And the truth is not that the Catholic Church can change its teaching on this issue. The Catholic Church very clearly teaches what it teaches. And I know some Catholics that play this like I'm going to go to a liberal parish, but like at the end of the day, I know what the Catholic Church teaches. I lived in accordance with the traditional understanding of the Catholic Church, and I don't think I could ever bring myself to play this like picking and choosing beliefs. Now I'd gone to like this like liberal Protestant church for I think a total of like 2 or 3 times. They were gay friendly, but I was like, either I believe in Jesus, I'm willing to give everything to him and have good reason to believe in him, or I shouldn't. And anything in between is this like I can't make a decision or I'm making up my own excuses. So I think it was really after that fall of like dogma, which this is like how we need to see the world. I was never able to like deconstruct those one by one. If the Catholic Church is wrong on anything, its teaching apparatus is defunct and isn't trustworthy. So after like investigating dogma and a few of those other like high level concepts, I was like, oh, this it basically falls more or less like a house of cards. Could I ever see myself one day joining a liberal Christian church? Sure, but I don't think I would ever like honestly believe I would be there for friends more or less.
What about the arguments from, let's say, people like Dan McKellen and Bart Ehrman, where they're arguing that these terms are not what we think they are, how these social conditions are not the social conditions that exist today. Therefore, our view is invalid because we don't live the type of life that the people who wrote it lived. So we're completely missing categories here.
Yeah, I think a Protestant could make those arguments. I don't think a Catholic can. Because the Catholic Church is what helps us interpret the Bible. It doesn't matter if we're able to reinterpret the Bible. The church is like the lens through which we understand scripture. And every Christian for basically all of the existence of Christianity has held that homosexual acts are, as the catechism says, depraved, or actually as the catechism quotes. So it's almost like a quote within a quote. But yeah, the church has always held the belief, and the church it doesn't teach that way where you can start trying to like play this game of reinterpreting scripture. The church has an interpretation. The church teaches what it teaches. If it's right, it doesn't matter what you feel about it. You should follow it because it's the truth. And if it's not, we don't have good reason to believe it.
So for me on that issue, even if you want to play the game that the Old Testament laws don't exactly align up to our modern sensibilities, you do have the fact that uh, Paul says both the passive and the active partner are going to hell. So once you have that, I don't think you have a way out of it, no matter how clever you are with the wordplay.
Yeah, I think if we hold scripture to the highest standard, which is like it's inerrant, it's divinely inspired, it's authoritative, I think you can make some arguments about like they have a different idea, but at the end of the day, nowhere, basically the entirety of Scripture points towards like maybe it doesn't enumerate a particular modern ideology or the root cause of it, but it's like marriages between one man and one woman seems to be what the Bible teaches, especially towards the later Old Testament and then entirely into the New Testament. I think if you brought that debate to any of the authors of Scripture, they'd look at you and be very, very confused what you're talking about.
So the next few questions, I'm going to layer the questions in. We're going to do step by step. We'll start off with the Bible. We'll get into the church fathers, and then we're going to get into doctrine. And from there, we'll start hitting dogma. Okay.
Cool.
So with what's going on with the Bible, is there any way that you could justify your actions and think that you were being honest to your faith based on what the Bible is saying?
No, I think there's people that think that they're genuine about it, but I don't know how we hold scripture as this like infallible, inerrant, inspired thing, and also like it's wrong about its conception of human sexuality seems to be like a very large theme. And then once again, like even from a Catholic perspective, even if we can personally reinterpret the Bible, the church has taught that. So it's like this backstop. Even if you can disagree with scripture, you still have to deal with the church, which has always held this and will never change on it. So I don't know how people intellectually hold this position, which is like, well, it can change or it's different. It's like the church teaches what it teaches. It seems to be backed up from scripture. And I think anything apart from that isn't holding to how the Catholic Church sees the world.
What about the argument that so we eat pork and we eat we wear synthetic fabric and we don't condemn people for that. We're not wearing little talismans anymore. Um, if the church can change that at the very start of its faith, of course, this is a terrible misunderstanding of what Catholicism teaches, but this is the argument. Why can't it change when it comes to the teaching of modern homosexual relationships?
Yeah, I think you could talk to a Protestant about that and have a really fruitful discussion about like what does it mean to have basically the three types of laws laid out in the Old Testament, which are like more or less like the traffic laws, which are like laws for a particular society to function, the like ceremonial laws about how they wanted to worship, how God wanted to be worshipped, and then like the moral laws, which are like the unchanging truths. So we have like three different categories of rules. So if you're talking to a Protestant, like you can quibble between like what falls into what category, but at the end of the day, the church has authoritatively taught what is in each category at the very least that homosexuality is in that moral law. And the church's entire understanding of sexuality is based on one that will always preclude homosexuality. So I don't think the church could ever change on that particular issue.
So, do you know who Lizzie Answers is?
Yeah, and I've watched some of her stuff, but I'm not intimately familiar with her theology.
So when I was coming back to the church, what led me back to the church was Paul. I had read the Bible at that point. This was like my seventh time reading the Bible. And Paul really struck out at me on that seventh reading, not the first six, like on the seventh one of like, hey, this is not what Jesus said. Hey, this is not what Jesus said. And his misogyny and anti-Semitism, not the homophobia, but the anti-Semitism and misogyny, really, I needed answers. And one of the answers that I found that was really satisfying until I actually went back to church and went to RCIA or whatever the adult version of it is that Lizzie Answers had just graduated from one of the seminaries, and she was talking about how, and this is before she became Catholic, how it was only talking about male prostitutes and other justifications there. And I thought that was a great answer. And as a young, liberal, not yet Catholic person, I was like, hey, that's a great answer, and I'm just going to take that and throw the rest away. Do you think that having so much Protestant information and having so much, you want to call it woke or progressive Christianity happening, and then you have counter apologetics and you have these kind of false preachers that are pretending to be Christian, but they're clearly have an anti-biblical bias where they're saying the exact opposite of what the Bible says? Do you think that clouds the understanding for the everyday Catholic? Not so much for obviously it's going to confuse the atheist, but the Catholic who should know better, do you think it's confusing them? I wasn't in the church at the time, so I was able to be, like I could just have an opinion, but someone who's actually in the pews and they're hearing their priest, the priest isn't having this conversation with them. So this conversation, I think, could be toxic for their mentality. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, do I think that a lack of clarity on a particular issue and hearing contrary voices is probably going to sway the average person? Absolutely. I think it's more indicative, not on this issue in particular, but like very few Catholics know how the Catholic Church sees the world. And so I think if a Catholic knows that like what the Catholic Church teaches is definitive on these large moral issues, and they have to accept that, and it doesn't matter what they think or what the Bible says or anything else. Like if the church says this, I have to follow. Like if they know that, then like all the other beliefs are like, hey, the church says this, this, and this, and they're going to accept all of those wholesale. So I
Not
think
to
like,
not to
yeah,
diatribe too far, but I don't know if you saw Matt Whitman recently. So everybody got kind of upset about the Pew Research Center when Catholics didn't actually think that the communion was actually Jesus,
yeah.
but Protestants they have a huge problem now where Protestants don't believe Jesus is God, and it's like, where are you going to church? What's happening that you're not even getting the basics of your faith?
Yeah, I think that's where, like, to be an intellectually honest Catholic and to be a faithful Catholic, like, you have to hold what the church teaches. I think anything else than that, you don't believe in how the Catholic Church teaches. So you have like incongruence between like what the church or what the Vatican teaches and like what people believe. And I don't think it's like a lack of teaching on those particular issues, but like how the church sees itself in the modern world, which is as authoritative, as infallible, as basically the mouthpiece of God. Um, and so that's where homosexuality isn't something that like if how do I explain this? Like I find that like debates on it tend to be like really unfruitful because at the end of the day, even if like all the science like changed in either direction, like the church will never change. If any other moral consideration on this particular issue, even if it was proven that Paul thought contrary, like it doesn't matter what happens in any of these arguments because at the end of the line, it's like, well, if you want to be faithfully Catholic, you have to accept what the church teaches on matters when it comes to pertaining to faith and morals. So like all these other arguments are useless because even if somebody wins all of them, they still have to like complete this final boss, which is how the Catholic Church sees itself in the world and how it teaches, which is where my biggest problems are. I think on I'm talking. And that's where like I think there's a difference between talking to somebody who's like dogmatically Catholic and somebody in the pews. Because if I lay out arguments for homosexuality, the average Catholic's going to be persuaded. But if I'm talking to somebody who fully believes in the church, I gotta yeah. It doesn't matter what arguments win; they still have to subscribe to the church, and that's where I take the biggest issue with how the church teaches.
So responding to some of my more, there's some big hitter intellectuals that sometimes pop in, and when I respond to them, what I say to them is that it doesn't matter if you can prove some of the Pauline letters were not written by Paul. It was already canonized by the church, so it doesn't matter who the actual author is. It's already authoritative to us because we declared it so. So let's move up to that step. Let's talk about the church fathers a little bit. Are you familiar with any church father writing talking about homosexuality? And do you think that has had any influence on you or on lay Christians who aren't even familiar with the church fathers, but might still get those arguments like filtered down into them?
Yeah, I think we see from the earliest church fathers, and I find it particularly telling when we can look at documents when it comes to especially the development of monastic life around that third or fourth century, when we have very specific rules when it comes to monks who engage in sex with other men and the resulting consequences. And they're clearly enumerated and they're quite frequent, which means that this was something that was happening, where you don't make up rules that don't ever apply to things. So it seems, especially like we can talk about the church fathers and the theological concepts, and then they seem to disagree on different things. So even if we pit church fathers against them and don't see them as authoritative, when we look at any like actual rule book when it comes to monastic life or how early Christians thought about the issue, they were all in agreement that any activity with the same sex was a mortal sin, was something that should never be approved, that was never seen as a good thing, and carried very serious penalties in any context for doing that. Now, do they have a modern conception of sexuality? No, but like it wouldn't matter to them because the activities themselves were reprehensible.
Well, it's ironic to me, and a lot. There's a few of my atheist friends already in the chat who are talking. Um, they like to bring up the sex scandal and like, well, why didn't people respond? And one of the things that kind of shocked me is when I was reading Trent, um, they had rules for how to handle these situations. They actually had laws, and it's like, well, why wasn't it followed now? Like, if this has been part of church tradition, like this is how you deal with these situations. That you do send them to the authorities. You do get the Pope involved, and then we do the opposite. I do think that that's even a bigger scandal because we actually had rules addressing these situations. But again, the rules of Saint Benedict, the I was thinking more church fathers when I asked this question, but
Yeah.
even if we go into the ecumenical councils, we have rules that tell you how to handle sexuality, how to handle all this kind of stuff. Was that ever confusing for you, or when you went into it, did you understand that this is the rule? You cannot act on these intentions or these inclinations.
Yeah, ever since my ninth grade year when I fully accepted all church teaching and Father Mike's talk that I made a video about, like that's where it finally like that was the last straw to fall after a few months of investigating. Beyond that, there was never confusion. There was never, I mean, there was like an emotional doubt, but there was never an intellectual non-assent to what the church had to teach, or this like the church can change it, or that the church can re-understand it. I never played that card because I don't think it's intellectually honest. I think it's born out of an emotional or a secular view of the world, which I think are better ways to go through the world. But at the end of the day, from the time I started being Catholic and was a baby Catholic, fully accepted what the church had to teach, never was going to change it, never saw confusion in how the church has ever understand it or understood it. Yeah,
But if you're looking at, and again, we're sticking right now, we're still on the church fathers. We haven't gotten into
yeah,
doctrine and dogma yet. If we're sticking with, you know, what religion, what holy people have taught, not just in Christianity, but in Buddhism and in Taoism, you have this theme of self denial. You have this theme of aestheticism and turning away from sexuality and controlling your sexuality, and celibacy as being this great gift of, even in philosophy, of how distracting a woman can be, or if you're in Plato's Republic, how distracting a lover could be. You want a platonic relationship, not a sexual relationship. This is not just a Christian idea. What about that was not appealing to you? Because for me, I forget what the word is, discerning, monk, becoming a monk, not becoming a priest, but becoming a monk. And if I hadn't met my wife, I probably would have. So what about that self denial did not appeal to you, or did it appeal to you, and that's why you went to the radical traditionalism?
it definitely appealed to me, and I think that's why, especially in rad trads, tend to either be very zealous converts or people that had a past they're trying to run away from. That in traditional circles, everybody is fully all the way into Catholicism. Now you could say like, especially on the political side, people have disagreement, but like the average person who goes to a Latin mass, hook, line, and sinker will believe whatever the church teaches. And trads talk a lot about self-denial, giving up worldly pleasure. That's like kind of like the crux, especially in traditional circles. And I thoroughly enjoyed that discourse. And I think because I had given so much to the church, which is like one of the most important things about me and my identity, that to like go to adoration or go to daily mass for like lesser sacrifices. And you see, especially within the priesthood, a majority are men with same-sex attraction. Because if you've already given your life to God, it's like, what more is it to become a priest? Or what more is it to go to daily mass? Or what more is it to follow the church on something you might have hesitancies about? So that theme of self-denial, both inside of the church now after having left, are big things still, even to this day in my life, and a sense of pursuit, a sense of discipline, a sense of not following all of those same desires, and doing whatever you want, but being very intentional about how you want to live life, what you find valuable, and doing whatever it takes to pursue truth versus just whatever you feel like.
So, and again, now we're going up a little bit higher. We're going to go into a little bit of doctrine here. Do you think that the priests are doing a good job of explaining what Catholic doctrine actually is? When you were going to mass and you're in the homily, were they addressing the issues that you were struggling with as a, I'm going to say homosexual. I don't like the word queer. So as a homosexual person, were they actually addressing your temptations and your issues, or were they just either condemning or even not addressing that?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between like the Novus Ordo world and the traditional. So in the Novus Ordo world, the parishes that I went to were very clear about moral issues. I never went to a gay affirming parish and never went to a pastor who did the whole like, well, let's be nice about it shtick that everybody interprets as like the church has changed its teaching. I was at either faithful Novus Ordo parishes that were clear about moral teachings but nice about it, or at traditional parishes that were very, very clear about moral issues and kind of took the gloves off, so to speak. Um, there were some terrible sermons that I've heard, none pertaining to homosexuality in particular. But the parishes that I went to, they did a very good job of. I think the average person in the churches, if you were to poll them, would have almost be perfectly in line with church teaching at the churches that I prefer going to.
Okay, so let's go up to dogma now, and hopefully there'll be some place for me to give you some pushback. If not, we'll
Yeah.
just continue on with the conversation. Um, what do you reject about Catholic dogma? Let's start off there. Let's start off with something that I'm pretty sure we're going to disagree with.
Yeah. So I would I'll take a step back and kind of explain almost an epistemology, so to speak, which is like when we talk about like empiricism, if we talk about like this side of the screen here, empiricism in the most hard form, which is like running very particular experiments, only making statements that can 100% be or 99.9% backed up. Like when we talk about the speed of light or the temperature at which water freezes, like these almost brute facts about the world when it comes to gravity, all of these like not even yeah so we're just talking about like what can everybody 99.9% agree on. It's kind of like one side of certainty, and we have a ton of evidence for them. If somebody wants to deny evolution or gravity or any of these theories or even then the laws of science, like you can have a really really big discussion and really take somebody to task about it, and you can get everybody more or less on agreement when it comes to just like pure empiricism. And then we kind of take like a step left from like we almost certainly know these things and have a ton of evidence. We take a step towards like, let's say, interpretation of data or interpretations of data or explanations of things almost akin to like politics, which is like we talk about like economic facts. Like we can verify like what is the median income. Everybody can get to that same or what is the median income around these parameters. Like we could get to those facts. And then it's like, and why is that the case? We still have a ton of evidence, but like we don't hold belief as certain as we get further and further away from like things that we can completely and empirically verify. So we have like politics is kind of like a step there, and then further down the line we have more like value judgments, which is like how do we make yes or no decisions, or how do we move about the world from these like interpretations of hard data. And we hold less certainty there, and we're less sure about things, and we're more likely to change, and people can disagree more. And I almost see religion as this like step on the farthest end of the spectrum, which is like we have the least data, we have the least agreement between people, we can have the least substantive discussions, but yet we hold on this religion side, especially on the dogmatic side, more certain than we do about gravity. Despite with gravity, we have overwhelming evidence and we can have really substantive discussions. We can run experience, we can do all of these things, but we hold it to less of a standard than dogma, but yet we have more certainty in dogma than we do in gravity
So
or brute facts.
let me stop you there. Do you think that there is no grounding in dogmatic thinking? I know that
Yeah.
some of the people that I interact with think that dogma is the worst thing in the world. So, do you think there is no grounding in dogma, or do you think that there is grounding in holy tradition?
Um, I think that we have varying degrees of evidence for various dogmatically described positions. So I think that like when it comes to particular dogmatic statements, like we have more or less evidence depending on them. And so I think like if we have a discussion about like divine simplicity is like utterly incoherent, in that like we can't investigate it, we can't identify it, we can't figure out the ramifications, we really don't know a ton about it, but like we have to be absolutely certain. Now we talk about like the resurrection. Like we have more historical facts, like we can start having a historical discussion, but that's moved up to the same level. And so no matter what the dogmatic position is, I think they have varying degrees of evidence to hold various positions. And I think my biggest gripe is that like we go through life and generally like to hold our positions to the degree of which evidence we have. So it's not that like the church is wrong in every instance, but the fact that it makes us have complete agreement with it despite any evidence to the contrary or any evidence that we can investigate, we still have to hold that, is perhaps what people could describe as
Where do you think the
anti-intellectual.
church is most wrong? Where do you think the church is clearly wrong that you can objectively argue against it?
I think it's from that conception of dogma, which is like this is not how we do anything on planet Earth. Is like hold things as objectively true, that can never change. That our understandings can maybe change a little bit, but that it's true, despite any evidence that we have. And so it's less of like, and I think we play this game, and especially as we talk to people who aren't as familiar with philosophy, like how do we go about life? Is like we change our opinions based off of new evidence. The Catholic Church can't do that. if somebody wants to say the Catholic Church is correct on it, it's like, cool, you can say that, but like when we talk to the average person, they're going to make decisions based off of evidence, and the Catholic Church is utterly out of step with how we do any other serious form of inquiry or how we understand the world in any other context.
So, do you reject revelation as a source of knowledge?
Um, yeah, I think we can make statements that the church believes things because blank, or historically the church has held various positions, or that seems like people within the church say these things about revelation. Yeah, but like when it comes to like the veracity of it, we can't investigate it beyond the church says it or these people within the church. And if I reject the entire authority of the Catholic Church, revelation is incoherent, so to speak. If I don't grant that the Catholic Church can have revelation to begin with.
Okay, let me make the dumbest argument I can make, and I want you to counter it. Okay,
Yeah.
I, I'm aiming for the dumbest argument. Okay, I'm
Okay.
aiming for the low bar. If Jesus simply gave commands that are in the tradition and he gave this word to his disciples, and there are more traditions about Jesus than what can be contained in the Bible, and therefore that oral tradition survived in apostolic I forget the word, but tradition. How are you, as someone who's at the time submitting to the Catholic Church, going to say that that tradition is wrong? If God Himself is saying, here are the rules, this is the way to get to heaven. He's not talking about this is the way to live a good life. He's not talking about this is the way to make $1 million. He's saying, if you want to follow me, this is what you have to do. This is what He told His apostles. This is what His apostles told their disciples. And this is what their disciples told the church fathers. This is the record. This is tradition. Who are you to defy this? Again,
I
the
fully
dumbest
agree.
argument I
Yeah.
could think of.
I don't think it's a terrible argument in that like G.K. Chesterton talks about like tradition is like democracy of the dead, meaning that like you as a 21st century Christian who's not being martyred, who's somebody who's new to the faith, like how are you to say that you're above 2,000 years of Christian tradition? I think it'd be a really dumb thing if you think that the church is authoritative, that Christianity is true, and there's people that are much more holier than you. I find it dumb or perhaps dangerous to say like, oh, I know better than the church. So like once again, like tradition and scripture and revelation, all these things are internally coherent. And I think that if you are a faithful Catholic, you should accept tradition. But I'm not going to accept tradition because I don't accept that the Catholic Church has authority to begin with. So even if Jesus said something, it's like, cool, I can grant that Jesus says that or that the church says that or a certain document says things. I think the more important thing is like that's not how I go about making decisions in my life. So even if it's internally coherent, it doesn't mean that it's true or that I have evidence to believe it.
Okay, let me ask the same question now at
Mhm.
a slightly higher level. I'm probably going to ask it like
Yep.
three ways, but let's go with a higher level. So, if the founders of the church, those who won the argument for orthodoxy against all the heterodox views, these are the smartest people in the room. These are the people who were at the councils. These are the people who won these arguments, not just against fellow theologians, but against entire cultures. These are people who overturned and somehow conquered Arianism when it had conquered the church. This is the tradition that they teach because they have seen that in their own congregations, just as John Christensen said, don't go gamble, don't go celebrate, because when you go, you're lost. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how many times you come into church. The moment you go gamble, you've lost everything that we've worked for. Now, when you come back, I'll love you again. But while you're over there, you're damned. This is the truth. When you go gamble, when you go have sex, when you go get drunk, you're going to hurt your life. You're going to hurt your income. You're going to hurt your wife or your friends or your family. You're going to be exposed to diseases. You're going to be exposed to dangers that you won't be if you're here in the pews. This is the wisdom of the ages. Why are you rejecting this? Again, level 2 of the same
Yeah.
same.
I think once again, like we have claims about what the church says, and I don't disagree what the church teaches. I don't reject that, or I don't reject that the Catholic Church claims that fornication is wrong, or that excess gambling is wrong, or getting drunk is wrong. I fully grant the premise that the church fathers and the entirety of the church has held certain positions. I fully agree that that is what the church teaches. And once again, it's this game of like I reject how the church teaches wholesale. And so it doesn't matter if every Catholic believes a certain thing. I don't believe what the Catholic Church that the Catholic Church has a reliable means of reaching truth.
Okay, now I'm going to ask it for a third time, this time at the highest level that I have. That isn't the highest level that's out there. I'm not Jimmy Aiken,
Yeah.
my highest level. So I lived a very sinful life. I myself was an anarchist. Uh, I was almost a heathenist. I was a uh, Socratic and Aristotelian, and I was Kantian, and I was utilitarian, and all those kind of what's the best result, what's best for me, led me down a very dark path. I became alcoholic. I went through diabetes. I went through a cancer scare. I've lost all my income multiple times. This is the first time in my life that I've lost my income voluntarily. The last 3 times was because I messed up majorly. And every time when I followed the dictates of the church and I followed the Bible, my life improved. When I stopped having sex with random people, my life improved. When I stopped drinking, my life improved. When I stopped spending money on evil things, my life improved. And I'm not saying that I'm somehow, oh, I'm perfect now. No, I'm still attracted to beautiful women. I still like sex. I still have a hard time separating my sex drive from my intuitions. I myself live as if I'm the person I want to be, because I really like how Jordan Peterson said that, and I try to live that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I have a crush on the bad girl that used to do porn, who I know in real life, who I know how to call her, and I'm like, I haven't erased that number off my phone. I'm married. I've never talked to her. I'm never gonna talk to her, but that number's still on my phone. I still didn't erase it. So I still have sin. I still have temptation, but I'm choosing God and I'm choosing the Bible as my guide. I'm choosing the church as my guide to avoid those temptations. And I even quit my job this last time to take care of my father who's sick. And I went to the priest and I told him everything that I was doing and told him everything that I wasn't doing. And the priest affirmed to me, yeah, this is going to be hard on your marriage. Yeah, this is going to be hard on your life. This is going to be hard on your income. But not hanging out with people who go to strip clubs and instead taking care of your father is the right move. Yeah, losing the income of $6,000 a month or $4,000 a month or whatever amount a month and going to a regular job where you're not going to get paid jack and you have trouble paying your bills is better, because now you're not spending that money on evils. You're not spending that money on temptations. You can come home and you can actually do the things that you want to do, like interview lovely people here on YouTube. So on that level of argument, again, I'm only going to do it 3 times. That was the third one. I won't hit it again. How would you push back against that?
I wouldn't. I think that your life has improved, and I'm happy that you are living a better life. Like, dude, there's not even like a but after that. It's that you found something awesome that works for you. You are happier now. You are more fulfilled. You are doing what you want to do. You've gotten away from vices, and I think that is wholesale awesome. Like, there's not even a but after that. That is perfect. That is awesome, and I'm glad that you found something that works for you. Does that pertain to the veracity of the Catholic Church?
I was going to say,
No.
let me ask the question. Let me ask the follow up. So
Yeah.
so it looks like I'm asking it. So why doesn't that apply for you?
Um, why doesn't that apply? Because that still doesn't make it still doesn't provide evidence that the Catholic Church is true when it comes to teaching dogma. If we said that the Catholic Church teaches things that people report that their lives improve after following those rules, yeah, like that's something that we can investigate. That's something that we can claim and then actually back up. And I think that's awesome.
So let me interrupt you there then. What
Mhm.
is your level of truth? For me, my level of truth is practicality. If you do certain actions and you do them the exact way and you get the exact same results, that's true. If you do certain actions and you get the opposite result of what it says you're going to get, that's false. How do you justify what is true and what is not true? Again, I'm giving you a little bit of
Mhm.
pushback here. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be a jerk about it.
You're good. Yeah, it sounds like a big word, and a lot of people don't know what the word means, but I'm more or less a nihilist when it comes to everything. I think people think nihilism means depression. It just means a lack of seeing inherent meaning in things. And so I think when it comes to discussions of truth, I would definitely take much more of a pragmatic approach, which is like we have beliefs that work for us. And I think when we talk about in psychology, like why do people choose things that seem to be destructive? It's providing them something. And so I think in anything in life, like we pick beliefs that work for us. When it comes to like claims of objective truth, that this is the truth, like I don't know how we investigate almost all of those claims apart from like people have found things that work for them for better or for worse or whatever labels we want to throw on it. Like people find things that work for them.
Okay, now I promised at the beginning of the interview that I would give you time to talk about your actual message and your
Yeah.
sexuality and how that influenced it. I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I do want to give a little heads up to my audience. I am going to leave an open room if you guys are interested. Let me know in the chat. If no one's interested, what we'll end up doing is just kind of a wrap up second, shorter interview where I'm going to give Kate a chance to talk to me and ask me questions. So it's not just me pressing him as hard or as gentle as I can. If you all do want to come into the room, let me know. B.S. Lewis, I know you love coming on to chat. If you want to come on in, you're welcome to come in. For those of you who are trans or LGBT, even if you're watching LGBTQ, sorry, and who are watching, even if you're watching incognito mode, let me know. I'll gladly put you on here. You can ask Kate questions. You can push me on questions. I'm totally open to being pushed and to being argued with. It doesn't hurt me at all. Okay, so go ahead, Kate. This is just for you. I am going to interrupt you to ask you questions, but I'm
Yeah.
going to let you go. Okay, so explain to me how your sexuality fits into this and what you want to explain about sexuality, especially to my audience and people who are going to watch this video tomorrow at 10:30 when my usual audience bump happens.
Yeah. So I think the big thing here is that if we believe that what the Catholic Church teaches is authoritative, that is the end all be all of when it comes to settling moral matters, like of course, then the Catholic Church is true because it says it's true and everything it says is true is true. Like we get into this circular, like it is true. So when it comes to like, I don't know how we reverse engineer our way out of like picking and choosing particular Catholic teachings. But I think the way of thinking that the Catholic Church does is um, so different from how we make any other decision in the modern world, which is like we're going to weigh the pros and the cons. We're going to look at what does the scientific literature have to say about something. What do people how do people's personal testimonies line up to things? What are some general trends that we can see in people's lives when it comes to making certain moral decisions? We gather all of the evidence, and then at the end of the day, you make a value judgment of what risks or potential risks are you willing to tolerate on either side. So any decision is going to have pros and cons, whether you're celibate for the rest of your life or you live, let's say, an actively homosexual lifestyle. There's going to be pros and cons for each.
Let
Um,
me ask you about
mhm,
that. So I'm not someone who's out there advocating celibacy or anything like that. I think
yeah,
that's good for me. I think that's good for Catholics. I say if you're outside the Catholic Church, you don't have to follow our rules. If you're of us, be one of us. If you're not one of us, you go do your own thing. That is the message of the gospel. I know
yeah.
that apologists don't agree with that. But with you, why isn't celibacy, or what do you think about the call to celibacy as the answer to the homosexual question?
Yeah, so I think that we can get lost in a lot of very big language when it comes to this particular topic. We almost need to do like a chart of like a dubious style, like yes or no to like what can we do, either following Catholic Church teaching or not. So when we talk about like um, to to identify as gay or some sort of queer identity, the answer is like to be a faithful Catholic, like you're a Catholic with a same-sex attraction, you aren't a gay Catholic. When it comes to like, can you ever go on a date with somebody to whom you're attracted? No. Can you ever fall in love with somebody to whom you're attracted? No. And this is exclusively for people who experience exclusively same-sex attraction.
Well, let me push back
Mhm.
on you a little bit right there. So, um, let's just go with I'm a straight man and I'm going to go hang
Yeah.
out with 3 of my friends. Okay. One of my friends is also super straight, and me and him hang out and we play video games together all day. Another friend of mine is super gay, like as gay as possible. And we go out. So, with my straight friend, we play video games for 5 hours or 3 hours every day, depending on our job schedule. And with my gay friend, I really love the theater, and I can't find my wife won't go watch the theater with me. So, we go spend 2, 3 hours every weekend going to the theater and then having coffee or tea afterwards, and we're talking. And by the way, I'm describing real friends.
Yeah.
Okay. So how is that not a date? How is that not a platonic relationship that can be completely fulfilling and completely there? Like, if my gay friend has a problem, it's not as if I'm going to go, "Oh, you're my gay friend." No, I'm going to be like, "My friend has a problem. I'm going to drop everything and I'm going to help them." If my straight friend has a problem, me and my other friend are going to drop everything and help him. We're part of each other's lives. We're part of each other's community. How is that not a relationship in every sense of the word but sex?
Yeah, it certainly is a relationship. It's a relationship in which two people deeply care for each other. But when we get to, and if you're somebody who only wants to have friends the rest of your life, then it's like awesome. But the call to celibacy at the end of the day is that you cannot hold hands, you cannot fall in love, you cannot kiss, you cannot marry, you cannot have kids with, you cannot live a life with somebody. And then on top of all of that romance, which is perhaps we couldn't say inherently sexual, but is always sexual or has some sort of sexual nature to it. Those are things that you can never experience for the rest of your life. Having a family, and so like yes, we can say that like friendships are there, but at the end of the day, like you can never experience romance with somebody who also experiences romance towards you or a physical and sexual attraction actions to you and to them and to fall in love and to go on dates and all of these things are things that at the end of the day, no matter how we dress it up and how we explain there's different four types of love, like if we grant that friendships and marriage are different things, then we can only have one and not the other one. And so I look, Catholics always talk about like, great friends and we're here to support you and friendships are really awesome. Like, yeah, friendships are awesome, but I can guarantee that the relationship that I have with my boyfriend as we're looking to get married down the line is something very different in the way that we interact than any friends that I've ever had. And I've had very, very close male friends, but they're all platonic. There's something very different about romance and about sex. And if we said that there is no difference, then what is the Catholic Church condemning? Yeah,
So I'm going to push back a little bit. This isn't really a
yeah,
Catholic argument. This is just life
yeah,
experience. I've been married for 6 years or 7 years. I've been with my wife for 8 years. I can tell you this. At this point in my marriage, me and my friends have a very close relationship. Me and my
yeah,
wife don't always agree on everything. So
yeah,
there is something to be said for the lifelong um, intimacy of friendship. And I haven't heard that you can't hold hands if you're gay or you can't, I've like I said, I've gone to one parish where like the lesbian couples do hold hands. They
yeah,
don't receive communion, obviously, but they're in there in the mass with their dad or whoever in their family is supporting them, and they're doing the thing. So I haven't heard you can't hold hands. I understand you can't make out, but I mean, there is such thing as the Christian kiss. There is such thing as being friends. And I've worked in several industries that are very male dominated, and trust
yeah,
me, there is nothing as gay as a bunch of straight guys hanging out together. Like that's way worse than
yeah.
than what actually goes
Yeah,
on.
but anytime that we're talking about holding hands or kissing or falling in love or going on dates or having relationships in which those physical things are a manifestation of an internal or emotional disposition, like if I were to hold hands with another male, it's categorically different than holding hands with somebody I'm going on a date with. And so like can two men hold their hands like this in a Catholic understanding? Yeah, if they're both straight and Chaldean monks do it, like cultural norms are different, but when they're an expression of like, I'm attracted to this person, I want to be with this person, I love this person, I find them very attractive, and I want to have sex with this person, like anything going down that line or even being in the near occasion of sin is not allowed. You say like they're allowed, but they're not kicked out of the parish. But it's like if you want to be a full participating Catholic, to bring your partner to mass with you and to be fully integrated into the parish and to have kids one day, it's like sure, like you could find a liberal Catholic parish or a not so liberal Catholic parish or whatever you want, and you could be breaking church rules. But at the end of the day, you cannot go to every Catholic parish in the country and hold hands with your same sex partner and be a full participating member. You're going to experience different levels of pushback on it, but you're still never going to be looked at in the same way as a straight couple. At the end of the day, there might be different language around it. We might talk about friendships, and I get that some marriages end up turning into friendships or falling away, but you can never experience that falling in love part ever for your entire life without it being sin or being seen as less than.
So I wouldn't consider the falling in love part the sin. I guess the actions would be what they would call the sin. But let me give you not a hypothetical. Let me give you
Mhm.
a real example. My wife's an atheist, so we had to go through the process of making that okay with the church for us to get married. We still haven't had the marriage within the church. We're still going through that process. The priest has sponsored us. We've done all the thing, but the lockdown made it very complicated. And when things started going again, our situation had changed. She no longer lives in country. She lives in another country. Um, and so she's an atheist. So she doesn't have a drive to spend, $6,000 for a plane ticket to come do a third interview with a group of priests in a closed off room, you know. But we also don't want to live in sin. She respects my religion. She respects that there's certain things we can and can't do, which does put stress on our relationship. And that's a little bit more than my audience needs to know. But you understand what I'm saying. You
Yeah.
understand the rules. There's things we can't do as a married couple if the church doesn't sanctify it. That doesn't mean I never break. I mean, obviously it's my wife, but it means I have to confess it as a sin, and it's a very weird thing to confess, because even the priest is kind of like a half chuckle and a half like, well, yeah, I know,
Yeah.
and it's like, you just wait till you get the yes. You're going to get the yes. Like, you're doing all the correct steps. And it's like, I'm glad you say that, but I've also been married for 7 years, and I wasn't celibate for 7 years. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to at the end of the day, like, with the Catholic Church, there are teachings that you have to follow, and I think you should first evaluate, like, what are the consequences of following the church teachings for the rest of my life going to be? In which ways am I going to love church teaching, and which ways am I going to not love church teaching, and what is it gonna prevent me from doing for the rest of my life? And so you gotta, like, first realize, like, what exactly the weight or the gravity of the situation is. If you're a straight Catholic and you're like, "Yeah, my wife and I just can't use birth control one day," like, I still think that's a big thing, but it's like you can still get married, you can still have kids, you can still go on dates, you can still have sex. None of those are possible in a Catholic understanding with same-sex relationships. And so it's a very, very big claim to make. Big claims don't inherently mean false, but then we have to go like, that's a really big claim. We should probably have adequate evidence to back that up. If we don't have evidence, we have grasping at straws, we have word games, we have a number of different things that are arguments, but none of them, even if we say that they're true, hold very much weight. At least in any modern discussion of any moral issue, we don't use teleology. We don't play word games. We actually look at scientific studies. And if it's something that you do want to accept, awesome. Like, there's nothing wrong with accepting things you want to accept. The problem is if you don't want to accept those things, you should have adequate beliefs. And then we go into like, we don't make moral decisions in any other framework. We look at pros and cons, or we look at what the church has to say, and that can never change. The church doesn't have the level of evidence that I was looking for to follow that. And yeah, so once again, it's like I when it comes to like, is it true or is it not true? It's like I found beliefs that work for me. Of I love being in love. I love having a relationship. I love being able to explore my identity. I love being able to make moral decisions based off of scientific pros and cons and what I want at the end of the day. That's not how the Catholic Church operates. That's not how it makes decisions. And so you have to weigh those things and look at the evidence. And if the evidence doesn't match up, you either have to accept it on blind faith, or you have to go, maybe the church isn't right about everything on planet Earth.
So I would disagree with you on the blind faith, but I think we're going to end the main part of the interview here. Everybody is saying you're a great guest, so they don't want to push back on you at all. Even my most vitriol followers are saying that you're awesome, and they don't want to push against you. So I'm
Awesome.
going to take another minute break, and then I'm going to give you a chance to push back on me. And then after about 30 minutes from there, we're going to call it a night. Sound good?
Awesome. Yeah, I probably got about another 20-ish minutes or so before I
Okay.
gotta wrap up for tomorrow.
Let's take a brief break. It's going to be less than a minute, and then I would like you to ask me questions, and feel free to push as hard as you want. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to set a little timer for 20 minutes. After everything's done, don't just hang up. We'll turn off the stream and we'll just kind of close out before you go, okay?
Cool. Perfect. Sounds like a plan.
And I'm not kidding. Everybody in my chat loves you, man. So you did great.
Awesome.
Okay, 20 minutes on. Let's go. What would you like to ask me?
So I think, how do I want to go down this line of questioning? When it comes to Catholic Church teaching, I would assume that you would see it as ultimately authoritative and unable to change,
I
or
would say
change in
that,
substance. I could say like the interpretation can change, but like,
okay.
would you hold that the underlying truth is always true?
So I'm not a rad trad, so I do believe in development of doctrine,
Yeah.
and I do believe in evolution, and I do believe in the progressive revelation and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we can add new books to the New Testament. Put it that
Yeah.
way. Maybe some stuff in the Old Testament, like maybe we can incorporate the Orthodox canon, but I don't think we can go any further than that.
Yeah.
But that would change some beliefs. Like it would
Yeah.
add Holy Hezekiah and a few other stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I don't think we can stretch it any
Yeah.
further than that.
So on specifically, I think we'll hyper focus when it comes to homosexuality,
Okay,
just because it's much easier to talk like in a particular context. Um,
fine.
would there be any amount of scientific evidence that could change the church's teaching on homosexuality?
I think that on a social level, yes. On a dogmatic level, never. Like not even an
Yeah.
inch. But I do
Yeah.
think that social acceptance will continue to grow. It has to.
Yeah.
I don't think the church is going to disappear. I do think progressive Christianity is going to disappear. I do think Protestantism is going to just disappear. Like it
Yeah.
just cannot survive the level of scientific knowledge that's coming. They're still trying to deny evolution. They're trying to deny dinosaurs. Like it's not going to make it.
Yeah.
But Christianity, but Catholic Christianity is going to endure, but it's going to have to adapt. And I don't mean adapt on the dogmatic level. You're not going to have female priests. You're just not. And I
Yeah.
don't care how many Title IX changes you make. The church has been persecuted before. The church has
Yeah.
anathematized nations for not going along.
I'm going
with
to
it
jump into
before.
just keep on a very specific line of questioning.
Okay.
So if we were in a hypothetical where unless people who identified as gay could get married and have sex with somebody of the same sex at a 100% self-deleting rate, could that change church teaching? If every study in this hypothetical world where unless gays were able to sin in the eyes of the Catholic Church, there was a 100% unaliving rate, could the church's understanding of homosexuality change?
So I'm going to again counter back with a real example, not a hypothetical. So I was in a poly relationship, and the third person in that poly group, I was in several poly relationships with, let's not get into that. But the third was always a woman. So that means that the woman I was with was at least bi, if not.
Yeah.
And one of she still, I say she still identifies as a she, but she has begun the process of binding and doing all of that.
Yeah.
Her biggest depression, her biggest hurts were from within the homosexual community, and because of our relationship, I've stayed in touch with a lot of that community. So I'm very interested in the studies that come out, and the studies don't show that acceptance is helping. No, I'm not saying that not accepting is a good idea. I definitely don't agree with that there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have invited you onto my channel. But I do think that your question is flawed because of, if wide acceptance was the answer, I'm not talking about tolerance. I'm talking about like absolute giving in to all the ideology was the answer. People wouldn't be having the mental issues they're having, and people wouldn't be having the social issues they're having. There's something else going on. And I don't think it has to do with it being evil or sinful. I think there's some kind of cultural illness happening within that community. And I think it's affecting the entire world right now, at least everywhere that's not China,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we have very different ways of approaching the world, which is to say that like when it comes to how we understand human sexuality and what to do about it and how to live self-described, self-fulfilled lives. Like the science could change, and then my beliefs will change, right? When it comes to somebody in a
Mhm.
polyamorous relationship, I've met many. Most tend to not be super happy. At least that's in my
Mhm.
experience. And if a study came out that everybody was polyamorous, was unhappy, like okay, then that's going to update to like go from like polyamory is probably not a great idea, or at least not one that I want, to like we shouldn't do this and should. And then if we had a scientifically proven pathway to like get people out of homosexual relationships, then it's like awesome. Then the views can change, and I think that's the biggest disagreement, which is like in how everybody else looks at the world. It's like the science can change the underlying issues and how we interpret them. We look at psychology, we look at all of these fields, and we can change. And
I know
that's where
this
like
is your
yeah,
question time, but there's a question from the audience, and now that they're
yeah,
saying some questions, I want them to be addressed. You
yeah.
can answer it if you want to. Is it more? This is from Juan Santiago,
Mhm.
and this is a loaded question, and I think they're actually attacking more the T than the LGBT.
Yeah.
But it's the question is it moral for a person to threaten suicide to get what they want? I can't say that word, and I just said it to self delete, but not and get what they want.
I think the question is like, what does it mean for something to be moral or not moral? Which I think is where when we get into these debates about morality, we tend to like say these words and not know what they mean. So when it comes to like, is it moral for somebody to threaten that to get what they want? I think is like asking what's the square root of the camera that I'm filming on. It's like it's a question that doesn't really make sense. I think we have to break it down into like, um, do people want to live in a society where people threaten that to get what they want? Overwhelmingly, I'm gonna guess no. Do people who use that tactic, have fulfilled lives? No. Is that a great are people around you gonna get tired of that antic and not want you to be part of their lives? Yeah. So I think, like, especially in moral questions, we need to really decompose them down into their parts, before assuming that every single word we all agree on what they mean, and really look at the pros and cons and make empirical claims, and let people make value judgments versus like moral rightness or wrongness.
So let me answer this question as well, and you can push back
Mhm.
against what I say. I do want to say that Ad Astra said that she believes that acceptance would have saved her sister's life, and I'm very sorry to hear about that, Ad Astra. That's a horrible tragedy. Um, for me, acceptance didn't work for me. People accepting me for who I was floundering in my life. I
Yeah.
say this to my wife a lot when she asks why we're married. Me and my wife are very different. I'm an artist, I'm a writer. I dropped out of college. I'm literally 5 hours away from graduating, and I dropped out. But it's having someone in my life like my wife who's asking more of me, who's saying that I'm not good enough as I am, that I need to stay healthy, that I need to be smarter, that I need to earn more
Yeah.
money, that pushes my life forward. And I'm not saying that that's the same level as an identity, but I had to give up my identity as a writer to become a salesman. And I had to make that sacrifice, and it was not an easy one. And it's one that now I'm kind of undoing as I'm
Yeah.
growing in my understanding of myself. I don't
And
think
so yeah.
blind acceptance is the answer. I do think there is a level of tolerance that's important. I do believe that acceptance of an individual, once that individual knows themselves, is important. But while that person doesn't know who they are, accepting them blindly based on where they understand themselves to be could actually hinder them from who they could be. That doesn't just apply to sexuality, but if you want to talk about sexuality, people's sexuality, from the way that I understand it, is very fluid. So someone's attraction and someone's intention could be very different 10 years from now. And if you're going to hold them to their standard of when they were 21 compared to when they're 43, it's a very different thing.
Yeah, and I think to that end, um, those are a lot of claims that we can investigate. Do people's self-reported who they're attracted to change over time? We can look at studies surrounding that. When it comes to what are the rates of adverse mental health outcomes, we can investigate those. We can investigate what factors go into the equation, and we can make decisions and we can make determinations based off of what the data says. And we're not mandating that everybody who says that they're gay has to be married to a man for the rest of their life. You can find something that works for you. And I think that's the categorical difference between how most people see the world, which is like, we're going to make pragmatic decisions. We're going to investigate claims. We're going to be okay with the pros or cons. When we look at medicine, like doctors don't just like walk in and go, awesome, like lose weight and then leave the room, or go walk in and say, lose weight because God told you so. Like, here's the pros and cons of how a particular lifestyle decision is going to affect your health. You can make a decision. It's your determination. That's how we do science. That's how we do medicine. That's how we do psychology. That's how we do politics. That's how we do everything on planet Earth. But that's not how the Catholic Church understands the world. It's God says this, the church is true. And so that's the end of the discussion. So it doesn't matter if there was a 100% unaliving rate. It doesn't matter if there's any study that shows that there's no other alternative out. It doesn't matter what the science says. It doesn't matter what your experience says. It doesn't matter what anything else says apart from the church. Now, we can reverse engineer and make the argument that like the church is going to be backed up by science, but it's not because of science that the church arrived at its conclusions. So I think if we make honest determinations about the world from a non-dogmatic standpoint, we have fluidity and we have ways to investigate and change as and hold our beliefs to the level of evidence that we have. That's something that the Catholic Church does not have, and is not how we make any other moral determinations, or that the average person will ever see as persuasive.
So to push back against that, I do think the church does have 2,000 years, and even if you want to go with Judaism, the
Yeah.
faith has 3,000 years of proof that living a specific way, and I don't just mean sexually, but living by certain ethos does give great results. And when you reject those ethos, lives do fall apart. Now, you can say, and I'm sure you will, that that's partially social conditioning, that because society was designed, literally socially designed by the church to reject these things, we don't know how well these people's lives would have turned out if there wasn't that inherent rejection. But this is not a rejection that just comes from religious culture. In the ancient Roman and Greek cultures, these lifestyles were also rejected. It's not as if this is just a Catholic thing. There is a wisdom there. Now, you can reject that wisdom. You can modify the wisdom the way that I do, which is where I don't reject people who are LGBTQ identified, where I do want them in my life, where I do want to love them and support them. But with the caveat of like, hey, just to let you know, if you want to ever become a Catholic, these are the in-house rules for being a Catholic. And that includes not giving into your sexual inclinations. And that's for both straight and gay. And if you don't want to be a Catholic, I'll accept you. I'll love you for who you are. But understand that if you want to be a Catholic, you have to follow the Catholic rules.
But it's not how the Catholic Church sees itself when it talks about like, if the Catholic, like when I think about when I was growing up, at the time gay marriage was a thing that was being voted on. The local diocese didn't spend $8 million to have a relativistic campaign. Like, oh, if
By
you're
the way,
not
your
Catholic,
image
you can
froze.
get married.
Just FYI.
Let me see if I can get these settings. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you fine, but you're completely.
Yeah.
There you go.
Let me just go to my laptop camera here. Is like, when it comes to gay marriage debates, the Catholic Church isn't spending $8 million in Minneapolis to make a claim of like, well, if you're Catholic, you shouldn't be able to legally get married. The claim was like, no gays should be able to get married, more or less. The Catholic Church doesn't make its moral prescriptions on like Judaism in many different ways, where it's like, if you want to be Catholic, you got to follow these rules. That's not how the Catholic Church sees itself in the world. It doesn't say homosexual acts are depraved only if you're Catholic, that the acts in of themselves are wrong in any context, at any time, at any place, for any reason. They cannot be tolerated. And so the Catholic Church doesn't have in-house rules. It has rules for everybody when it comes to these objective moral standards. And the truth claim isn't, if you want to be Catholic, follow this. It's that like, this is the truth, and it doesn't matter what the science says. And we can't pragmatically bring our way back to objectivism. If we talk about the church, if people that follow church teaching have better lives, cool. That does not mean that it's objectively true, because we have people that don't follow church rules and have self-reported better lives. And same thing between Catholics and Protestants and every other religion. Everybody makes the pragmatic argument that people who follow those rules are fulfilled. And so if everybody's self-reporting as fulfilled, it seems like we have belief systems that work and people say that they're fulfilled, but we still haven't investigated the claim of like, can the Catholic Church dogmatically declare things? It's technically, homosexuality isn't a formally declared dogma, but it's not a church teaching that can change.
I want to push back on that just a little bit, and then we'll close out. But let me read a few comments here, and feel free to respond to them, but keep the responses short, because I know we're running out of your time. So Ad Astra added, and I'm just going to only read part of this, is that one size does not fit all. And I'm not saying that it does. Ad Astra, the Bible says that people do and can reject the message, and that we're supposed to wipe our sandals and walk away. We're not supposed to mess with them. And I'm again very sorry for what happened to your sister. And you're a very beloved person in my chat, and you've been part of my community for a long time. I love you, and even though you're an atheist, God loves you, and I pray for your sister, and I'm very sorry for everything that happened there. Um, as for B.S. Lewis, I'm going to skip your joke. And then Juan Santiago has a more aggressive question if you want to respond to him. But again, keep it short because you are short on time. I don't think you can prove tolerance and morality with science. Like that one quote is one thing to know how telephones work. It is another to say how one should use it. So it's the question of use versus, existence.
Yeah, I think in a pragmatic framework, we can make objective claims about what's going to happen. If you put your phone in water and it's not waterproof, we can say objectively it's not going to function. I think should is inherently I think should is a dumb question. We should make empirical claims about things of people that report a certain level of tolerance for their identity, report a certain amount of self-fulfillment. We can make claims about studies. That's how we do science. And then we can line them up at the end of the day and make trends that, for example, would be people that are in accepting communities tend to be alive longer and report better outcomes than people who are in non-accepting communities. We can make that claim, and you can do whatever you want with that claim. But when it comes to people making decisions, we go, what are the pros? What are the cons? What's going to happen? We can investigate hypotheticals. We can figure out, instead of playing these word games, we can investigate what would happen if these things played out, and then make subjective judgments about the objective data versus claiming objective things without any evidence.
So I do think that where we do disagree is ought versus is. I'm very much an ought kind of person,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with oughts, and I'm okay with me not measuring up to my own oughts.
Yeah.
That doesn't bother me. I fail at things all the time. But we're about to wrap up, so let me say one last thing on my end, defending my
Yeah.
point, and then go ahead and say one thing defending your point, and then
Cool.
I'll give an outro. And then I'll let you plug anything you need to plug. So
Cool.
for me, I do believe in the internal rules versus out external rules. I've read the Catechism. I've read Trent. It's very clear that the rules are for in-house. That if you can't excommunicate someone who's not part of our community. So
Yeah.
if the rule is excommunication is the final highest punishment because we can't know someone's heart, then the rules do not apply to those who reject our beliefs. And I do think it is a mistake to try to create a Christian nation. I do think a new Reconquista is a horrible, horrible, nightmarish idea. And I think Christians who are advocating for those kind of things don't understand history. I do think, and I do want everyone to get to heaven. That's true. But I also know that you have free will and free choice. And even though I now have moved to a more limited free will understanding, that is, you have the freedom to worship God, without fear, that's still freedom. And I think you have the right to reject that because God gives you the right to reject that. And I'm not higher than God. So I'm not going to force you to accept something you want to reject. But that doesn't mean I'm going to love you any less than I do. And that doesn't mean that if we get along, we're not going to hang out. And I'm not going to go buy you a pizza if you're awesome. And I'm not going to not hang out with you if you're a jerk. If you're a jerk, I'm not going to want to hang out with you. That's a different level of understanding. We're all sinners here in the world. We're all wretched, to quote some Protestants out there. But I believe humankind is good, and I would hate for those who are only hearing Trent Horn and only hearing Matt Fradd to think that that represents the church. It doesn't. The church has a lot of different levels of thinking, and we do want you to come to our church. But once you're there, we are going to ask you to change, and that is the unfair part of it. But that is the case. So that's my little word on my final thought on where we're at.
Yeah. Final thoughts. Final thoughts. I'll make a lot of I statements here. Is that I want to go through life making decisions based off of what I know about things. What's going to happen if I do certain things? What are the consequences? What are the pros? What are the cons? What good things could come out of the decisions that I make? I can look at science. I can look at people's testimonies. I can gather a lot of data about what would happen if I did certain things. I live a very, in many ways, I still live a very Catholic lifestyle. I still believe in a lot of discipline. I run 100-mile races. I believe in denying myself. I don't drink at all. I'm not a licentious individual. But there's a lot of moral decisions that I've made that might line up with Catholic teaching in many different ways. Um, but the cool thing is, if new evidence comes along, I can change my mind and I can be honest and I can make decisions that are going to work for me. And I think the one thing that we have to realize in life is that whatever comes next, you will never have the same life that you have right now. You will never be the same age. You will never be experiencing the same things. So we need to be okay with making decisions that we can live with when it comes to like, oh, if I live my life never falling in love, never holding hands, never experiencing romance, and I die, am I okay with that? Versus I can try. And the great thing is like I could change my position on what I do. I could break up with people. I could go back to being celibate. I can do whatever I want based off of evidence that we have. And that's the best I can do at life is make decisions based off of the data that I have at hand and the value judgments that I want to make. And I can change based off of the new evidence that I have instead of, well, God told me so, and it can never change in any circumstance. And I have to reverse engineer things through word games. I want to live a life that I'm proud of. I want to live a life that I'm fulfilled in. I want to live a life that I'm happy with. And I want to experience new things in life and live an awesome life. And I found frameworks that work for you. You're more than happy, or you're more than welcome to anybody listening to make decisions that work for you, whether you want to be Catholic, whether you want to be atheist, whether you want to be another religion, make decisions that work for you. Yeah.
All right. Now I am going to be closing out the show. If you would like to plug anything, go ahead and do so now. And then I'm going to do my outro. Don't just
Cool.
jump out. I'm going to close the live stream, but I want to talk to you for at least 1
Yeah.
minute more. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. The only thing that I plug is just my YouTube, Gay TradSpeaks. You'll see some of my content there. I have a TikTok, I have an Instagram on all of the platforms, but yeah, follow me on social media and feel free to comment or send me messages on what sort of content you want to see. I like sharing my perspectives and my thoughts. And if there's something, if those work for you, awesome. If they don't, awesome.
And just because I didn't want to get suppressed in this video, because YouTube, the algorithm knows that this channel talks religion, I purposely misspelled his name.
Tag. Yeah.
So it's change it from an H to a Y, and you'll find them. All right. So thank you all for listening. I am really grateful for you all for being here tonight. Once again, don't forget my message that I try to give every single time. Forgive everyone for everything, including forgive yourself. Remember, God loves you and I love you. And you're always welcome here on my channel, no matter who you are, no matter how you identify, gay, straight, bi, Protestant, atheist, Satanist. I don't care. You want to talk to me? I will talk to you. Have a great night. And thank you, everyone. Hold on. Let me go ahead and turn off the live stream.